We'll call to order the regular meeting of the Solvang City Council for September 10th, 2018. Will you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Jameson.
Here.
Toussaint.
Here.
Waite.
Here.
Zimmerman.
Present.
Mayor Richardson.
Here. Will you stand with me for the pledge, please? Place your hand over your heart. Repeat with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. This is what we'd like to see, a full room. This is terrific. A lot of interest. I'm glad to hear that. We have a presentation first by the Save Our Solvang Urban Growth Boundary. Susan?
Turn it on. Thanks for having us. I'm Susan Bott, and I'm representing my co-chairperson, Susan Bellany, and the rest of our Save Our Solvang committee. After our experience with the previous sphere of influence annexation study, we looked for an alternate solution to gain a vote for Solvang citizens when annexations or developments are considered. Our research pointed to an urban growth boundary as fulfilling that purpose. By the way, the following information applies to counties as well as cities, but here we're dealing only with Solvang. First of all, what is an urban growth boundary, or we'll call it UGB mostly? An urban growth boundary is a legal border or line that separates urban areas from the surrounding natural and agricultural lands or green belts. It places limits on the expansion of city boundaries without a vote of by residents. UGBs are often limited to a specified period of time, generally 20 to 30 years. Although it doesn't prevent development, boundary changes during that time, other than certain specified exceptions, require a majority vote by city's residents. And UGBs are included in general plans. Now, how is an urban growth boundary obtained? There are two ways. The first is using the initiative process. Residents of a city can develop an ordinance, obtain the required number of signatures, and submit it to the city clerk for certification of signatures and presentation to the City Council. City Council shall then either adopt it without alteration or place it on the ballot without alteration. The second way, a City Council itself can initiate a UGB ordinance and adopt it or place it on the ballot. Only a majority vote is required for passage of a ballot measure. And it saves money to include urban growth boundary ballot measures in general elections if possible, rather than financing a special election. How are these used in California? We've done considerable research on UGBs in California utilizing city and county websites, data collected by the Greenbelt Alliance, and ballotpedia.com. A few statistics. 68 California cities or counties have considered adopting UGBs. All but 5 were adopted. Most first-time urban growth boundaries were placed on the ballot as citizen initiatives. As these UGBs near their ending date, several have been renewed directly by a city council or placed on the ballot by the council to be voted upon by citizens. In our region, 2 have been adopted in Santa Barbara County. That's Goleta and Buellton. Citizen-initiated UGBs in Ventura County, and 8 of its 10 cities were approved by voters in 1998 and renewed for 30 years by voters in 2016. Since 1998, 11 annexation proposals were submitted to voters in Ventura County, and 6 annexations passed with a majority vote. So we can see urban growth boundaries do not necessarily prevent annexations. They just give citizens a vote to approve or deny specific annexations and developments. Most UGBs are in Northern California's suburban and more agricultural counties, counties similar to ours. Almost all of the counties south of Ventura County are much more urban, with most of their cities sharing borders with other cities, and having much less agricultural land. When you have neighboring cities or counties sharing borders with each other, you obviously don't need a UGB between them. In other words, there's no space between them, so it really doesn't matter. The first UGB-related action was Marin County in 1973, with more widespread interest developing in the 1990s and continuing. Most recently, from 2012 to 2018, 20 UGB measures were on ballots in California. 2 were narrowly defeated by a small margin, and 18 were passed by significant majorities. Some specifics that are included in urban growth boundaries. First, the following exceptions to UGB regulations are included in all or most urban growth boundary ordinances. There would be no unconstitutional taking of private property, which seems like a no-brainer to me. They're not applicable to any project with a vested right or development agreement. In other words, projects already in the pipeline are exempt. They're not applicable to any land use where state or federal law takes precedence. And they comply with state housing laws governing affordable housing, second units or density bonuses, and accessory dwelling units. In addition, ordinances might include one or more specific regulations regarding agriculture, conservation or open space lands, housing, often affordable housing, municipal and or public services, for example, water, wastewater treatment, parks, and schools. Now, what are some arguments for and against UGBs? Critics of urban growth boundaries have argued that UGBs may negatively affect housing supply, affordability, and overcrowding. Proposed projects may need to wait for an election to learn whether or not they can proceed. Agricultural landowners may feel they may not be able to sell their land for other more profitable uses. Those in favor of UGBs argue that a UGB is the preferred tool for giving residents of a city or county, those who may be affected by annexation decisions, a vote on development proposals. Proponents, including Save Our Solvang, argue that UGBs preserve productive agricultural land and open space around cities. Urban growth boundaries encourage compact development rather than sprawl and reduce the cost of infrastructure and providing services for new development. Research shows that UGBs used with land use policies that include incentives will not be a cause of changes in housing supply or affordability. Such incentives might include density bonuses and streamlined processing of applications for infill development. Save Our Solvang favors using Solvang's current city limits as the urban growth boundary. In conclusion, residents are the ones most likely to be negatively affected by annexations. The data indicate that residents of other California cities and counties believe they should have a vote on such proposals. Save Our Solvang's informal canvassing of our city's residents indicates that they too agree that they deserve a vote on our city's future. Save Our Solvang asks that members of the Solvang City Council develop an urban growth boundary initiative and place it on the ballot for the next general election in November 2020. We look forward to working with you on this measure. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you, Susan. Just a moment. I'll ask the council if they have any questions. Seeing none, thank you very much, Susan.
Okay,
thank
thanks.
you for the presentation. It was very well done. Thank you. And thank you for the question and answer thing about it. Thank you. City Manager's report.
Just a couple things. One, remind everyone that Danish Days starts this week. We'll have the Torchlight Parade on Friday night, and then the regular parade on 2:30 on Saturday. So there'll be some road closures throughout town for that. And then just honoring the employees who hit certain milestones. Jeff Morse with your wastewater department has 15 years of service now with the city.
15 years?
15 years. So
Fantastic.
that concludes my report.
Thank you.
Public communications, written or verbal. At this time, please direct comments to the City Council regarding consent calendar items or matters not on the agenda, both in the jurisdiction of the council. Speakers are limited to 3 minutes. Bronte Reynolds. Followed by Sabine Olson.
Thank you very much. My name is Bronte Reynolds. My wife and I moved to Solvang in July of 2017. And when I got here, I immediately started looking for some public tennis courts to play tennis. And I was told that Hans Christian Andersen Park had some tennis courts. I went down there. There were a bunch of guys playing. Got on board there. They play every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And and this was a year plus ago, the courts were in pretty bad shape. Over the period of the 14 months that I've been playing down there, the net posts are falling apart, the nets are coming apart, and the cracks on the surface of those tennis courts have gone from just a crack back in July to about, in some cases, 2 or 3 inches, and the concrete is coming out of between them, and I know that we have pride in Solvang and what it offers, but these tennis courts are an embarrassment to us all. Not only that, but I would think that if you want to go down and take a look yourself, you might check the liability of the issue there. We're going to continue to play because it's the only place we can play. But I'd like to put this item on an agenda for action and maybe do a little research and find out if we can possibly come together and create some kind of a timeline and a way to finance this project so we can put those tennis courts back together. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Brad's got a comment on that.
Yeah, actually, in this year's budget is a plan to redo the tennis courts. So we're in the process of developing a request for proposals for a design build on those. So
Okay, do we have a timeline?
It's in this fiscal year's budget, so within the next probably 6 to 8 months.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. Sabine? Followed by CJ.
Hi, I'm Sabine Overson. I'm just here to say thank you. I wanted to do it way long time ago. I was in Denmark riding my bicycle with my family. I wanted to say thank you, Joan Jameson, Ryan. I don't know how to say your last name. Toussaint, neat, and Karen Wade for actually making this happen. I hope, and I just wanted to happen for removing the parking off of Mission and putting bike lanes on Mission so we can make this, again, a friendly, bike-friendly town. I do have I also wanted to kind of thank you because I think you did a really great job. They have in San Luis Obispo right now, they are also removing 58 parkings off of downtown, just like we will be doing. And so it's going all in the right direction. I'm just curious to know what time are we talking about those parkings going to be removed, and when do we see more bike lanes around town and not waiting like 10 to 20 years? So, is anyone can answer that?
Brad might have a comment on that.
I'm going to have Matt come up and respond to that one.
Do I need to? Thank you so much.
Good evening, Matt Vanderlinden, your Public Works Director and City Engineer. Good evening, Mayor Richardson, council members, and members of the public. So, I know you don't want to hear this, but our staff is swamped. We're like buried, and it's on my list, but we got to hire an engineer. We got to do full plans, route them through Caltrans, get their approval for an encroachment permit, then go out to bid. We have to publicly bid the project as a public agency, and then we'll hire a contractor and come out and do the striping, grind off the old parking space markers, and some of the centerline striping will most likely have to be adjusted. So it's kind of more complicated than it might seem. Just take out the parking and paint the curb red. It's a lot more involved, because when you add those bike lanes, the center line may have to shift in different locations. And then there's the traffic control and the phasing of the construction work and all that. So long story less long is about 2 years I would expect the work to be completed.
Thank you for that. CJ, followed by Lansing. Duncan?
There are 4 pictures there. I was here a year ago. This is C.J. Jackson. I'm here from the LSL. I've got 2 topics, so I got to be really fast. Number 1, I was here a year ago talking about Alamo Pintado Creek and the burden that the heavyweight rainstorms put upon the LSL River course at the transition from the property line. The first picture you see there is a horizontal tree. It crosses the entire creek bed. You'll see beneath it an obstruction of several broken logs, several broken trees, branches, etc. The second picture is behind that impediment, what it looks like, and you'll find a fairly hefty supply of fallen trees and debris, etc. The additional other 2 are what the sides of Alamo Pintado Creek look like as you go beyond our property up. And essentially what has happened is that Alamo Pintado Creek has become a dump site for tree branches and disposal of yard waste into it. What happens in a major flood event is that yard waste tends to flow somewhere. Last storm, it flowed to our doorstep, and we were burdened with a hefty cost. And the observation I had of the entire burden that was posed was these were perfectly cut branches that arrived at our doorstep. So that meant these were prune trees that were placed into the creek bed and thereby ended up costing us a very hefty $17,000 to clear. So I bring this back to your attention. It is probably not in Solvang's jurisdiction because there's a county portion there. This is in between 246. It is actually right across from the Mission and the winery property on the other side there. It doesn't really matter whose burden it is. If you get a significant debris burden right there, the after effects will affect somebody in Solvang, one way or the other. I would ask that you use your good offices and chat with Mr. Fayrum, at least have somebody go down there and look at it and examine whether or not this burden might pose damage to others than just the LSL. That's all I have on that topic. A month and a half ago, I came and chastised you a little bit about your curtailing of discussion on a zoning and annexation study. I did so because you cut off your discussion before you got to talk about costs. There are 2 types of costs that are involved in these. There are the actual cost to impose something, and there are opportunity costs. Opportunity costs are what are lost by not pursuing something. I believe before you tackle the urban growth boundary, which I can't tell you whether I support or not support, because I believe you have to answer those fundamental questions. You have a vision for Solvang going forward. It will deal with water, wastewater, housing, affordable housing, and a host of other criteria, which were all components of the analysis that you had in that report. Before you go into something that may be 10, 20, or 30 years long, please satisfy yourselves that you have reviewed the components of that study so you know what you're giving, taking, or giving up. Understand what the opportunity costs you might forego for other elements of the city's future without understanding that particular set of data. I think I'm done.
Thank you, CJ. Lansing Duncan, followed by Muffy.
Thank you. I'm Lansing Duncan. Thanks for the opportunity to speak here. I did want to speak in support of the urban ground boundary presentation that was given by the SOS organization. And particularly because it has some unique benefits. I think you all saw for yourself that the SOI expansion and annexation process that's typically used can be very loose. It's not definitive. Conceptual ideas are floated around and theoretical land uses are proposed. We saw that the City Council suggested certain uses, but property owners wanted others. And the land can be annexed supposedly for one use, but it may be developed another way, depending on what makes money for the property owner and the developer. LAFCO and the public can be told one thing, but once the property is annexed, the zoning and development of the property can be entirely different. The process as practiced is subject to abuse. The UGB process for expansion is totally different. Voters can see how the property is supposed to be developed and look at a specific project. Now, there's no way to empower a voter more than to have them look at the specific project that is entailed when the city expands its boundary. They can evaluate whether the expansion of the city's boundary for that particular project is truly in the public interest, and the expansion will only occur for the development of that project. There can be no bait and switch. I would say that this is particularly important for Solvang because it's such a unique community. It has a specific vision of itself, and it vision of itself as this Danish small town in a rural valley really relies upon your gateways. And if you sprawl out of those gateways, you will be working against yourself in terms of continuing that vision that's essential to your visitor-serving economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Lansing. Muffy?
Mayor and City Council, thank you for letting us speak on this. Mr. Duncan spoke to an awful lot of the things that I would speak to. C.J. Jackson also has some very good points, I think. I don't believe that an urban growth boundary precludes your continuing to look at the things that were presented to you in as far as you got with the previous study that was presented. I think it got a lot of us on our toes about what could happen if we didn't watch what was happening here in our community and find a way to address having a voice in it. I very much feel that it is in our long-term best interest to have an urban growth boundary so that people do have the ability to speak to it and let you know and have a voice in the decision-making. I also think Mr. Jackson's point is very well taken. The urban growth boundary doesn't stop that happening for you and for us. All of the information is there. It needs to be brought forward so that we can all look at it. But I thank the people who have done the research on this, and I think that it's something, as I was sitting in my chair, all I can say is I didn't knock on a door that said, no, I won't sign your petition, when we brought the petition to you before that we did not want the annexation to happen without a voice. I think that is still true. I speak for a lot of people who don't have a vote in our community, won't have a vote in Solvang, but whose lives are affected by the things that will happen in Solvang with regard to infrastructure and traffic and all of those things which will impact us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have no other speaker slips. Does anyone else wish to speak at this time? Come forward and identify yourself.
Good evening, Mayor Richardson and council members. My name is Hank Homburg. I thought I filled out a slip.
Well,
but I
no,
guess
that I've got you for later on for the other.
Oh, okay. Well, I just wanted to make a
Item
brief
6.
statement that kind of echoes what the previous speaker said about the urban growth boundaries. And giving the people a voice is really important here in town. We don't have a lot of voice with regard to the tourism industry here, but what happens in Solvang that affects people that live here needs to be able to be voiced and the opinion brought up, hopefully on a ballot one day. So again, I thank Susan for all her work on Save Our Solvang and getting it together. And I hope that the council takes that into consideration in the future and hopefully get it on a November ballot, which is coming up very shortly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hank. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak at this time? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the council for council comments and requests. Would you like to start, Neil?
It's nice to see everybody here tonight. I'm kind of excited about it and excited about the election coming up here. Really excited about how many people are running for the seats available as well. And I wish the best of luck to everybody. Hopefully we can get some of these long-term politicians off the seat over here and get some new blood and diversification. But yeah, I look forward to that. And a good meeting tonight. Thanks.
Karen?
I had a quick question for Mr. Jackson. I was trying to place exactly the area that he was speaking about on the Alamo Pintado Creek. If you could please confirm that, clarify that for me.
Tell you how I got there. I started from our property border line, which is the far end of the last hole up there past the Condit residence, the next residence, the Andrew residence. I followed the creek up there. I probably went a good 200 to 300 yards before the impediment became too hard for me to continue hiking. So I would put it squarely in Alamo Pintado Creek, south of 246, north of the Alisal, and west of whatever the vineyard property is there, but it is north of the undercrossing that the rancheros take to come up the hill to the mission. So it's probably dead even with the olive grove at the foot of the property where the fireworks are, and in the creek bed there, if that helps.
Okay, yep, that helps a lot, thank you.
Is it near the house that's down there?
It's past that.
Past that south?
Heading north. It is
It's
heading
nor-
toward 246 from the old adobe house. You come up there, so it's below the housing development.
It's definitely in the county. There's just no ifs, ands, or buts.
Definitely somewhere.
Right, yeah, right.
No, I mean, it's
Well,
in
we
the
don't-
county. I was just surprised that if they're doing their annual cleanup and trimming, that they didn't haul it away instead of having it just thrown into the creek bed, as I'm sure that's what your point is. Why is this happening? So
I think Brad's probably going to handle that, aren't you?
We can definitely make contact with the county, but you're right, it is with outside the city limits, so.
Is that it?
yes.
Ryan?
No real comments, but just quickly, because I heard someone address the urban growth boundary with regard to getting on the ballot. That would be even too late, even if we wanted to do that right now, right?
No, he's talking
No,
about
this is for-
2020.
Yeah, their 2020 is.
Oh, for
what
2020.
They were asking.
Okay, yeah, that's what. Okay,
Is that all?
that's it.
Okay. I would just like to make a suggestion after our discussions at our last meeting regarding maybe not understanding what a general plan is and that it's really the laws by which the city operates. I think that maybe we all need to be educated a little bit more about what the different elements are of a general plan and how they function. So if we could work that in somewhere, if Holly could do a presentation on what a general plan does, so that we don't fret and try to reinvent the wheel, because the rules are there for us to follow.
What? I got one comment on the general part. What's the definition of general?
There's a general plan. There are binders that are they're the meat of the general plan. It was adopted back in 1985-86, and there have been changes to it. But there is a plan by which the city is supposed to do developments.
And in part of our budget, we did approve some of an update of the general plan, right? So
Yeah, the design element of that, but
okay.
yeah.
So in that, we could do a little bit of a presentation to educate
On
the
the
public.
total general plan, yeah.
Yeah.
We can do that. So I think I'm seeing you at least want an informational item on it.
Yeah.
So we-
Thank you.
I have a couple of things. In talking with a lot of folks in town, I get constant complaints about the new pedestrian crosswalk, and the traffic that's backed up by it, and the people that are concerned about how dense the traffic appears to be getting because of that crosswalk. And, you know, in the past we've talked about synchronizing crosswalks and signal lights. I'm wondering if there is something we might want to look at, is to the synchronization of all those items, so that we can improve the flow through the city.
I was kind of hoping that all be wrapped in the 246 engineering study.
Well, the synchronization, they currently are timed in a synchronized manner, the best they can, but when you had mid-block crosswalks and things like that, those throw off the platoon, if you will. And so you can't really, and that's a pedestrian push button.
Right.
So you couldn't incorporate that into the signal system.
Well, you could, because you could stop them from walking until a light blinks, and it could be synchronized with the traffic lights.
We could. I mean, those are pretty good sized capital programs to connect. They actually physically have to be connected.
I thought we had discussed that at one time, is to synchronize all the lights through the city.
Well, the ones that the traffic signals are, Caltrans controls them, and they've told us they're set to a synchronized timing. So
it gets interrupted by the crosswalk,
we don't control that. They do. So.
And then we all, I think we all saw the letter about Maple Avenue. Is there anything we can do about Maple Avenue and the speed through that traffic, using it as a major bypass of Copenhagen? I think that could be related to the crosswalk.
So typically, what we do when we get complaints like that was, the first step would be to put our signal or our radar sign out, just to remind people what the speed limit is, and we can definitely do that as a first step measure for that.
Is there any way we can reduce the amount of traffic going down that street?
That'd be a little more difficult. I think the request was for a gate, and that would make that a private road.
The gate's totally out. The gate is totally out of question.
I think you have to improve the efficiency on 246 to get people to.
Yeah, we do need. It's unfortunate that a bypass wasn't allowed years ago, which would probably have alleviated the problem.
But then they wouldn't have stopped in Solvang. They would have just kept going right on by.
Regarding Susan's presentation about urban growth boundaries, is there anything we want to do about a little research on it, or a little more something we can do as a council to either go along with it or not? Do we want to just let her presentation just sit here, or do we want to do something about it?
I think we should have further discussion on it. I also, if you would recall, was one of the the only individual on the council that wanted to continue the financial aspect of the study for the annexation, which we never completed, which would actually be part of this whole process. So I think it deserves further attention. I'm not quite sure how to go about it at this point.
Is there any other suggestions or comments? Do you have any suggestions, Brad?
Well, I mean, you could hold a workshop, try to get public input. I think you're a little premature for the 2020 election to do it now. So I would say after the first of the year, you may want to consider having some type of workshop to just have a general discussion, invite the public to come in and talk about urban growth boundaries, sphere of influences, all those topics.
All right, thank you.
But that might, that also falls under Joni's comment regarding our general plan, because I believe all of that would be related to the general plan. It's a very big issue, and I think the public has to realize that this and the traffic and all the congestion and all of the bike paths, a lot of new things that are coming up right now, and we're tasked with looking at everything on a very grand scale, and I think we're making some progress, but I don't want to put any cart before a horse. I want to get it right.
Good evening, Council. Holly Owen, Planning and Community Development Director, Economic Development Director. I wanted to just let you know that we do have in the CIP plans to update the land use element and the circulation element around that time, and that would dovetail very nicely with a conversation and workshop and some education for all of us about some of the possibilities and some of the consequences, intended or unintended, and all those issues really marry together, and we can use that time and perhaps towards the turn of next year to initiate the conversation I myself need a little more education about urban growth boundaries, or I haven't had a lot of experience with them. And there are 500 cities in California, and 68 of them have these. So there's clearly something for me to learn about why those work, what are the possible ramifications, just economically, if nothing else. So that's my intention, is to bring that information back to you, and part of that will be the general plan update process that will begin probably late next year.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Holly.
May I just make a comment? I lived in Marin County in 1973 when that was considered, and part of the reason they considered it was because of a horrible drought they were having up there at that time. I mean, we think we've had a drought down here. They had a horrible one up there, and all the watershed drained right into San Francisco Bay. Mount Tam would get 65, 70 inches of rain, and none of it was reserved for the people. It just went right into the San Francisco Bay. And there was one gentleman in the water district who took it upon himself to get a pipeline. He could never do it now. Get a huge pipeline across the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge so that we had water. Otherwise, there was no development going on. There was no water. It was terrible. So we have drought down here, but they really had a drought up there.
I just want to add one thing, Susan. One person does make a difference, and your presentation was part of that. And I want to thank you for spearheading your SOS and bring it to our attention. I'm not alone. Yeah, I understand that. Right. You guys are doing good. Thank you. Correspondence received by the City Council. There was one on marijuana manufacturing and testing, and a person that was not happy with it. Is there any comments on that? Then there was the Maple Avenue situation that we already mentioned.
May I make a comment about that? Sure. I don't know if anybody noticed, but the school parking lot was full on Sunday, Sunday of Labor Day weekend. So they have found that parking lot and they're using it, and that's great.
I'd like to comment on that. There wasn't any parking places left in town.
On Sunday.
On Saturday either.
I'm talking Sunday of Labor Day weekend.
Oh, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah. That whole Labor Day weekend was just it was really something. They were parked all over. Okay. On to the consent agenda. Does anybody wish to pull any of the items off the consent calendar?
I'd like to, I just have a question on E. Just E.
On E?
On E, yeah.
Okay. We'll hold on that a second. Anything else? Okay, can I have a motion then to accept A through D?
I'll move that.
Calendar? Is there a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Abstain? Pass. On 4E, Neil.
Yeah, I just wanted to double check with Matt on what that project entails exactly, as far as, I get the parking part of it, but the drainage pipe, and then like how far are we, or is there concrete that's going in to a certain place, or how is that working? It's just dumping into the creek.
Sure. So the project involves, the majority of the cost is the storm drain improvements. So for years, I don't know if you've noticed, but King Frederick Hotel sits about 18 inches below the crown of the road on Mission Drive, Highway 246. And there are several catch basins along the street there, but some of them are slightly undersized, and then also we get a lot of leaves with the winter storms and stuff, and they plug up those inlets and water floods over into the front doors of the King Frederick Hotel. So they've complained several times over the years, and about 7 years ago, after the big heavy storm in March of 2011, the city agreed to put a project on in our 10-year capital plan. So it's taken us several years to get to that point, but we started the design last year, and of course, but anyway, the project right now, the existing storm drain pipe is a 24-inch diameter pipe, and it actually runs right along the footing of the hotel, and underneath they have this little shed that's built off the side of the building for, I think it's for janitorial supplies and stuff. So the pipe goes right under that and right along their footing of the hotel. So If we had to actually dig that pipe up and repair it or replace it, we wouldn't even be able to do that without, you know, majorly cutting into the wall of the hotel and everything. So it's in a terrible location. Honestly, I don't really know how it ever got like that. It was many, many years ago that was put in. But so with this project, we're rerouting the storm drain system. We're going to increase the size of one of the catch basins, enlarge it. We're going to increase the pipe from 24-inch diameter to 36-inch diameter. So that, even though it just sounds like a 12-inch increase, the actual cross-sectional area is almost double of the pipe. You know, you're going like from this to this. So the cross-sectional area dramatically increases. And we wanted to get the pipe routed out of the easement that's on private property. So since the city owns the parking lot too right there, just right next to it, and all the piping was near there, we're going to route the new storm drain pipe down the alley a short ways and then down through the parking lot out to Copenhagen, and then tie back into the existing storm drain system in front of the blue, I call it the blue windmill. I think it's Sev Tap, is that the Sev Tap wine tasting room? So this is phase 1 of the project. So phase 2 of the project, which is in our 10-year plan, which the City Council has asked us to expedite, is continuing that pipe increase down 2nd Street and through to the outlet that goes through the vacant lot here that we're going to build a new parking lot in. So phase 2 will include that storm drain plus those parking lot improvements in one big project, and that'll be in a couple years. But so with that, there is a section of water line that has to be relocated. Maybe about 30 feet of it, we have to drop it for the storm drain pipe to cross, because the water line is under pressure, so you can kind of route it up and down and wherever you need to. But the storm drain pipe all flows by gravity, and so you have to hold a fixed flow line. You can't really like raise it up or down or whatever. So, so that's the storm drain improvements. And then we're going to reconstruct the parking lot and replace some of the broken concrete curb islands, and we're going to add some electrical outlets for the next year's Danish Days event, and do some minor irrigation upgrades, and then we're also going to put a new monument sign. So if you remember where the visitor center is, there's that little wooden sign that says "Welcome to Solvang," and people all stand in the planter in the bushes behind it, right up against the building, to get like a little photo op. So we've noticed that, and Parks and Rec had developed a project to create a new a welcome sign. And so if you can imagine where the Honan trolley parks to load passengers, there's that little brick area there. On the back side of that, we're going to create a decorative wall that says "Welcome to Solvang," and has some built-in benches, kind of like what we have in the Centennial Plaza. And that was taken by planning to the Board of Architectural Review for their input on the design of all that and approval of all that. So that's...
Matt, is all this construction going to take place during periods of low tourist activity?
Well,
Nice.
if you can tell me when that is, we'll shoot for that. But we're going to start the work in October. So, you know, it's after, we waited till after Danish Days, and so we're hoping to get it all done before Christmas, or at least the major work through the parking lot and all that.
Okay, before Yulafest starts then, huh? You hope to.
No, I don't know if before Yulafest, but before actual Christmas break. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments on 4E? Then can I have a motion accepting?
I'll make the motion.
I just have a question. I think you're within 500 feet, Neil, of the parking lot.
Yeah.
So you'd have to recuse yourself.
This is actually the 2nd Street parking lot that Matt was
just
describing.
2nd
Yeah,
Street,
the 2nd
even
Street
though it's a
parking lot.
continuous?
Yeah, the work
Okay.
that we're doing is the 2nd Street parking lot.
Okay.
Can I have I had a motion. Can I have a second?
I'll make the motion.
I'll second it.
Made, seconded. Made, seconded. Okay. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Passed 5-0. On to item number 5.
Item 5, wastewater treatment plant, enhanced treatment and alternatives analysis.
Well, it's going to be a controversial, because there's a lot of spokespeople.
I think he wants to stand, yeah.
Staff report.
Okay, well, good evening again. So I'll get started with a little bit of background, and then I'll introduce our consultant who is here to make a presentation on the wastewater treatment plant study that we've just completed. So just by way of background, the original Solvang wastewater treatment plant was built in the mid-1950s, and it has been actually replaced or improved or expanded on 3 occasions. So if you can imagine, about every 20 years, so mid-50s, and then mid-70s, mid-90s, and now 2015, or actually 2016 is the 20-year mark for the existing plant. And the wastewater treatment plant operates under what's called a waste discharge permit that we receive from the Regional Water Quality Control Board. So we have to actually obtain a permit from the state to treat the water and discharge it. So back in August of 2016, the Regional Water Quality Control Board notified the city staff that as part of our permit renewal process, that they were going to adjust our discharge limits for nitrogen and ammonia. And I'm sorry, they were going to add discharge limits for nitrogen and ammonia. So currently, our current permit, we do not have to denitrify the wastewater, but they notified us at that point in August of 2016 that they were going to add that to our next permit. And so in May of 2017, we initiated the process with the regional board to renew our permit. And the way that was done is the city staff drafted a letter and sent it to the regional board, and we addressed some requirements they had. So in our existing permit, it tells us in May of 2017, you got to write us a letter and initiate the process to renew the permit. So we basically followed that process. So the regional board also, when they informed us they were going to add these new limits for nitrogen and ammonia, they also asked us if we could begin to denitrify the water, to adjust or tweak our treatment process and to start denitrifying the wastewater. So as noted in the staff report and in Pacific Advanced Civil Engineering's report, the existing sequencing batch reactor, or SBR, wastewater treatment plant that we have is a poor plant design for denitrifying the wastewater. It's not really well suited to do that. So with difficulty, though, and with some assistance from a consultant, our staff was able to tweak the process and begin denitrifying. And in addition to that, the plant has been experiencing several other problems. And so we don't have an equalization basin, so we have significant diurnal flow variation or daily flow variation. And the SBR basins and treatment process is not really well suited for that also. We've had major problems with the blowers and inefficient coarse air jet diffusers. We've also have our outdoor sludge handling system and layout are poorly designed. The existing aerobic digester is less than half the size required, and our office lab and plant electrical equipment are antiquated and have reached the end of their useful life. So we've got a lot of these problems kind of all occurring now. And in addition, even though the flow to the plant has reduced, so the plant was originally designed as a 1.5 million gallon per day capacity plant. So that means it could treat up to 1.5 million gallons per day. But so during the drought, and with a lot of water conservation efforts throughout the last 10, 15 years, the actual flow to the plant has decreased. But the amount of waste or sewage or the strength of the wastewater has increased. So it's, even though the flow has decreased, it's become more concentrated waste and more difficult to treat that. And so now, as identified in the study, even though the plant has a nominal capacity of 1.5 MGD, it really only has a treatment capacity of about 0.9 MGD, or 900,000 gallons per day. So in addition, back in December of 2015, the Santa Ynez Community Services District, in November of 2015, the Santa Ynez Community Service District notified the city and wrote us a letter asking for additional capacity of 120,000 gallons per day, or 0.12 MGD, a million gallons per day. And then they also, shortly after that, started a study looking at the feasibility of recycled water, and they called it the Recycled Water Facility Study. And in that final report, which was finalized just a few months ago, the final report recommends working with the city of Solvang to upgrade and expand the Solvang wastewater treatment plant. Basically, the cost of a brand new standalone recycled water treatment plant is cost prohibitive. Also in spring of 2018 of this year, just prior to the new Los Olivos Community Services District being formed, representatives from Los Olivos approached the city regarding the possibility of the city of Solvang treating waste from a planned sewer system for Los Olivos. And then also, over the last couple of years through the drought, as staff made presentations regarding our water supply situation, a couple of times City Council brought up the question about recycled water for the city of Solvang. And so initially, when the Santa Ynez Community Services District started their study, we felt, well, let's wait till, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. Let's let them do their study, and then we can do anything further from that point if we need to. And as we saw there, as we were getting close to finalizing that study, we realized that not all of our questions would be answered in their study. So that was also incorporated into the wastewater treatment study that Pacific Advanced Civil Engineering, or PACE is the acronym they go by. So they included that recycled water component. So all of these different things were all sort of happening within a short period of time, or even some of them simultaneously. And so that led staff to recommend to the City Council to do this study, which the City Council authorized the staff to proceed with. And so at this point, I'm going to introduce the engineers from PACE. And after they do their presentation of the study, I had a few additional comments related to the finances. So the project manager is Andy Comer, and we have Dina, and I'm not going to try to pronounce her last name, but anyway, she's one of the engineering team, and Brian's back here. So I'll hand it off to them, and they'll do their presentation, and then I'll come back up for a few closing comments.
Do you want to use the podium? Yeah, no, I need the microphone.
Welcome.
Hi there. As Matt mentioned, my name is Andy Comer. I'm a vice president and owner of PACE. I've been with PACE for 20 years, and all we do is water and wastewater. We love it, and we're very passionate about it. We've been to your plant many, many times, and it's a little sliver. In case you guys haven't been there before, you go across the river over by the golf course, take a right, and it's a little sliver of property, and it goes downhill. It's like a bowling alley, and it's a difficult site. And whoever designed that facility back in the 60s and then expanded in the 70s and 80s and 90s, they had a difficult task. But here we are, it's 2018, and we want to maximize the long-term value of this facility. There's kind of a crossroads or a fork in the road, and what do we do? And we want to talk about that here today. So over the last year, we've sort of come up with, after we've studied, we've come up with this big, thick book of different ideas and thoughts and costs, and if you guys get a chance, we'd welcome you to read it, but today we're just going to present 17 slides to sort of summarize what's in that book. So process conversion, the process of treating the water, getting some additional capacity or higher capacity and possibly creating recycled water. Those are why we're here today. Those are the key drivers on this project. So number one, there's existing problems. Matt mentioned there's higher waste than the 1993 design. The amount of nitrogen in your wastewater is double what it was supposed to be, and now it's almost 2.5 times that. There's more salts, there's more nutrients, there's more stuff in the water going to the wastewater plant. Secondly, there's no filtration at the facility. So, you know, the wastewater operators, they're in the back of the room, they're doing a great job. They've got basically one concrete tank about the size of this room, and the wastewater goes into it and it gets treated and then it flows into the river. That's it. There's no filtration, there's nothing else on the facility to protect the river. And then third, there's new nitrogen standards that we have to meet. It's just a new hammer that came down, and unfortunately we're going to have to improve the plant whether we like it or not. Otherwise, we'll have to pay fines for violations. So what can we do? We've got 3 options, and we want to talk to you guys about which of these 3 is the best to go by. Somebody earlier said, I'm not sure which one I'm in support of. I also kind of feel the same way. There's pros and cons on all 3 of these. So the first one is you can renovate your 1993 design. So what you've got there right now, it's called an SBR, or a sequencing batch reactor. It's like a bathtub. It's a single basin that does a lot of different things. You could renovate that, and that's got the lowest capital cost. Secondly, you could provide an upgrade and go to a more modern technology, which would be more tanks. So actually you're providing yourself a bigger safety factor, more reliability, and the ability to treat the water consistently at a high level if you put in additional tanks, which would require more land annexed to the west of the property, or excuse me, the east of the property. Or third, you could actually provide recycled water. And that's a newer technology called a membrane bioreactor. It actually creates very, very pure water. And with that water, you can do a lot of different things. You could put it in the ground where it could be reused almost immediately. You could use it for golf course irrigation, agricultural irrigation, park irrigation, cooling towers if you ever had those at a hotel, for example. There's a lot of opportunities. So those are the 3 options, 1, 2, and 3. The third point is, unfortunately, you need more capacity now. The 80% rule in wastewater treatment is when the flow to the plant is 80% of its capacity, it's time to expand. And right now, the flow to your plant is 0.8 million gallons a day, and the capacity is 0.9 million gallons per day. So it's time to go. We got to do something. And then the other thing to consider is that you've got 3 trains, treatment trains I call them. So it's kind of 3 subdivided bathtubs. But you kind of, in a perfect world, would like to build your facility so that you could take one out of service. If you want to do maintenance, for example, on the aerator grids or the pumps or the mixers, you'd like to be able to take one out of service if we could in a perfect world. You can't do that now. And then fourthly, a recycled water opportunity requires an additional amount of treatment, unfortunately. So we've been trying to find a recycled water customer or customers, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. And then finally, I want to get into results and recommendations and next steps. And I want to encourage you at any time to interrupt me with questions now, or you can wait till the end. It's up to you. So on the left here is a photograph of the existing plant's aerators. The aerators are bubbling water all in one spot. That means that they're sort of clogged or jammed, and all the air is sort of going to one spot. As I mentioned before, it's difficult to take a train down because we're out of capacity. So the existing system's broken down. It's close to its solids and nitrogen capacity limit. And the photograph on the right kind of shows you once it goes and gets treated on the left, they clarify out the solids, it goes directly to the river currently. So this is a graph here of nitrogen. Nitrogen is the amount of urine essentially in the wastewater. And the original design is shown here in red. It was designed at about 25 milligrams per liter. The current amount of nitrogen, this is in 2017, is around 50, and now it's up to about 55 or 58 in 2018. So as you put in low-flow fixtures in your house, low-flow dryers, etc., the amount of concentration of these nitrogen components increases. And then, irrelevant of which process train we're going to select, there's also just base improvements that we have to do. One of them is you drive into the site, which is up here, and as I said, it kind of goes down this narrow bowling alley down to the river. all of the operations and administration personnel is down here in this corner. And it's in an old building. I think one of the rooms actually caught on fire recently. But that building is way down in the corner and it's not secure. So it's difficult to see what's going on in the main facility. And so we're proposing to build a new administration building at the front where people can check in, they can see deliveries coming in, and they can secure the site and also maintain the site. That's kind of a base improvement we're suggesting. Getting the solids processing in a covered area, reusing some of the existing abandoned 1975 tanks. There's kind of ancillary construction that needs to take place to improve this facility.
I have a question at that.
Sure.
The diagram shows the parking lot. It's quite large, I think, for the facility as it currently exists, isn't it? About 3 times or 4 times.
This proposed parking lot here?
Yes.
Yeah, it's actually just an open, flat field right now. But to your point, we don't have to pave all of it. It's an opportunity to use this for parking. But yeah, you probably wouldn't need all of this parking here. Yeah, you could use as much as you wanted to.
Excessive.
It's a graded, flat area that's usable for parking.
Been there several times.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Good. I'm glad. So now here's a flow diagram, as we like to say, and it's probably overly complicated. What's out there today is some screens, basically, to get rid of the solids that come in with the wastewater, and there's a single tank or bathtub. So everything goes through the screens, goes into the bathtub, gets processed, and goes out to the river. What we're proposing is, in alternative 1, if we want to renovate the existing, which is the least expensive option, we'd put in a new equalization basin, which is actually a basin to accept all of the sewage. And that basin can go up and down. So during the day when there's a lot of wastewater, it can come up. And at night when there's not a lot of wastewater, it can go down. And that way what we send into the main process bathtub, if you will, is a constant flow rate, which will help this process operate more efficiently and effectively. And then from there, we could, if we wanted to go to recycled water, we could, but we wouldn't consider recycled water in this option, so it would continue to go into a percolation basin and into the river.
Quick question. You say that larger bathtub, that's the current 3 tanks that are there?
Exactly.
In the case, before the accumulator tank that you have designed, if we have an emergency that requires the use of a backup or storage area because we lose 1 tank, can we reverse what we've gotten into with the denitrification? You understand my point?
Not really.
We're using all 3 tanks.
Okay.
And what if we need a 4th?
Right. And so I think
eliminate 1.
Right.
You know what I mean?
I think that's the perfect point of this whole topic, which is this option 1 in our minds is sort of a Band-Aid, if you will. We're renovating what you have. We're adding a tank and we're adding value, and it's going to be able to get by, but there's a very little amount of safety factor. If there is an emergency, if we do have to get into a tank, it's going to be very tight still. We're sort of not recommending this option.
We're at that point now, no?
We're actually even worse right now. We don't have this tank now.
Right.
So these tanks are all topped off. They need to be renovated, and we can't renovate them. So in this option, if we all decide to do that, we would build this new tank. You go in and renovate each one of these 3. As you said, there are 3 of these. You renovate the blowers and all the other things, and you get the place working the way it was intended, up to 1.5 million gallons a day. But it's still going to have a very little safety factor for all the problems that you mentioned.
The denitrification caused all that.
Yes.
Yeah, the requirement for it.
Denitrification caused all that, yes. So then option 2, as I said, this is the upgrade option. So what would you do is you'd keep your screens, you keep those 3 bathtubs, but then you would add on 2 new large circular clarifier tanks. And now that provides a bunch of extra safety factor and capacity so that you're going to get more reliable, consistent results. And also it has more capacity than the previous option, so you could take a tank out of service. Okay? This one also does not recycle if you don't do the purple side of this graph. So you clarify, all the clean water comes off, goes into the percolation basin, and goes straight into the river. So the 2 options on the left, which are white, we call those options A. So 1A and 2A. If you include the purple on the right, which is to make recycled water, that's options 1B or 2B. Okay? But we're not recommending either of those B options because if you are going to recycle water, we want you to do alternative 3. Alternative 3 is a newer technology. You take membranes and you actually create this pure water, and your tankage becomes more powerful. So the existing bathtubs in alternative 3, you actually pack them with 3 times as much biological treatment. We can triple the amount of bugs, and therefore your capacity is almost limitless. It'll take care of all of Solvang and all the surrounding communities for decades and decades. We'll have plenty of capacity. And you'll make pure water that you can use for recycled water, possibly indirect potable reuse someday. It'll set you up for the future. But it's more expensive. So where are our flows coming from and how much capacity do we have? This slide right here shows you Solvang, Santa Ynez Community Services District, Los Olivos, Ballard, and the total combined. So right now going into the plant is about 0.8 million gallons per day. The 1993 design was 1.5 million gallons per day when you didn't have your nitrogen limit. Unfortunately, we've lost about 0.6 of the capacity because of the nitrogen problems. And so we're now at a capacity of 0.9. So 0.8 to 0.9, we're right there. We need an additional 0.6 to get back to where we were, which is 1.5. And this over here would kind of show you a percentage of possibly how you could share in the cost of this upgrade. And as part of the study, as you guys know, on a side note, we actually looked at going with even more capacity. So if you thought someday in the future you'd want to go to 2 MGD, for example, we also looked at that in the report. And alternative 3 immediately gives you 2 MGD. Alternative 2 gives you halfway in between. Okay? So once again, this is kind of what we just said. You want to get back to 1.5 million gallons per day, possibly 2 in the future. And right now, we call it near-term future capacity, which would be these upgrades 1, 2, and 3, you get to either 1.5 with alternative 1, 1.7 with alternative 2, or 2.0 with alternative 3. These slides might be getting kind of long for you guys, so I'm probably just going to keep going here. But there's 17 total slides. This is slide 11, so we're almost there. This is just kind of where are we spending our money if we are going to upgrade this place? And it kind of shows you there's some general site construction. A lot of the money spent is in that process conversion. So upgrading, what are we going to do with big tanks where all the biological treatment happens? But then just going out on site and mobilizing and digging and doing construction, general conditions are going to be about 20% of the cost. So the point of this slide really is, if we're going to go do something, let's do it right. If we're going to go out there and we're going to engineer it, we're going to spend money on soft costs, that's engineering, and construction management and mobilization and a contractor, let's make a good decision so that we spend our money one time, we don't have to worry about it for a long time. So now here's kind of the hot topic, recycled water. In a perfect world, almost all of our projects, you make this great water, you recycle it. You send it to somebody, they pay you for that water, you generate revenue, and you save on potable water. Unfortunately, there's nobody nearby that you can directly sell water to that would in turn open up more potable water for the city. So what's shown here are all of the demands, non-potable demands that could take place. You've got the Alisal golf course. You've got agricultural areas all over the place. But a lot of them are outside the city limits, and almost all of those users either A, have access to a lot of inexpensive water, or B, even if you did sell them water, it really wouldn't open up more potable supply for the city currently. So unless there's a way for us to creatively work a recycle water deal, there's not a huge market for it right now. So this is, if you did go recycle water, there's some costs for pipelines, pump stations, and tanks outside of the wastewater treatment plant. It's about $1.5 million. But like I said, there's a lot of demands. There's the golf course demands that would fit in perfectly with what's coming out of the wastewater plant if you decided to recycle.
Could that be an add-on after construction?
That's a difficult question. So going back again to here, I guess, would be. Actually, I'm sorry. Right here. So as I showed you guys these 3 process slides, yes, if we decided as a group we did not want to do alternative 3, recycle water today, and we just wanted to do either alternative 1 or alternative 2, we could do the left-hand side, which is the white side of the slide. Then we could come back later and do the purple side of the slide. That is actually a little more money than it would be to just do alternative 3 right now. Not a lot of extra money, but a little bit more money. It's more efficient to choose it right now, but we could defer that decision till later. Yep.
Do you have to have a buyer if you wanted to do the recycle?
The city could elect to give it away if they wanted to. But the state mandate is if you bring recycled water to somebody's doorstep and they are currently using it for non-potable, they sort of have to take it for market rates. How the city enforces that, you know, we'd have to look into that further. But that happens in a lot of cases. So here's a summary now of the capital cost. So on the left-hand side is millions of dollars, and on the bottom axis is alternative 1, which is the SBRs, either without recycling or with recycling. Alternative 2, which is the clarifiers, without recycling, with recycling. Or alternative 3, which is the MBR, which gives you recycling immediately. And purple was selected here because purple pipe is recycled water, for those of you that were not familiar with that. So we think the best value here, even though it looks like you should go with the least expensive capital cost option, I'm going to flip to the next slide, which is operational cost. So even though you save money by going with alternative 1 on the capital cost versus alternative 2 on the capital cost, assuming no recycled water, you actually end up spending more money in operational cost every year. So instead of $1.3 million for operational cost, it's $1.4 million. So that delta of 0.1 gets made up almost in a 25 or 30-year life cycle. So the cost for these 2 brown bars, alternative 1 or alternative 2, are about the same. So in our mind, alternative 2, we've got the operators in the back of the room, alternative 2 is more reliable, more consistent, better water quality, it's more tanks, you can take a tank down for about the same 30-year life cycle cost. And then if you want to do recycled water, and if I read between the lines, we're not ready for that, then MBR over here on the right is the way to go right away. So just to summarize what I just said, are we going to do recycled water? Yes or no? If the answer is no, we recommend option 2, which is the clarifiers. It gives you 1.7 million gallons per day of service with all the tanks in service. And if the answer is yes on recycled water, we want to explore that further. Then we want to look at option 3, which is the MBRs. It gives you 2 MGD of capacity with all tanks in service. So then the next step, if we can all decide on what to do, is going to be about 34 months to do everything. That would be to pre-design, design, bid, contract, construct, startup, train, operate. 34 months, almost 3 years to get this thing complete. And with that, I'd like to take any questions, or we can hand it back over to Matt.
I have a question. Why is it that you have said that the city and the council are not ready for a recyclable system?
Well, I just heard a couple of
Yeah.
comments and a couple questions, but that was it. So for
Okay.
those of you that didn't say anything,
Okay, I was just curious where you got that idea.
you know, personally speaking, as a wastewater engineer, and the operators are in the back, an MBR is so reliable and simple to operate and great water quality. Almost a majority of the projects that Dina and Brian do are this alternative 3. But if we decide that, you know, we want to kind of keep doing what we're doing, which is discharging to the river, then we don't need to look at that.
I just, I mean, having worked with other water districts, and having seen them sell off potable water to other areas, just the whole statement that you made that there were no buyers out there, I don't know if that's true. I mean, this is the first I'm kind of really getting into this and looking at this, so I don't know if that's factual, if there may be buyers out there. I don't know if we've looked at that.
Matt, do you want to comment on that real quick?
Yeah, sure. Sure. I think what Andy said was that there was no buyers that would be able to offset their potable use to make that water available to the city. So Brad, in his update to the city council, I think on Friday, mentioned this briefly, but Brad and I met with CJ Jackson. Obviously, the two golf courses are beautiful places where you could use recycled water. We have determined at this point, at least at a preliminary level, that the water quality of the water we could provide him would be perfectly good for irrigating the golf courses. We might have to double check on the greens. Years ago, when they started providing recycled water to golf courses, the greens were more sensitive and you had to provide potable water to the greens, and you could use recycled water on the fairways. And so then you'd have to double plumb the whole golf course, which is like really expensive. And you know, if you're planning a golf course from scratch from the beginning, with some big development in Palm Desert or whatever, you can plan it like that way, and it's great. But so in our meeting with CJ Jackson, we discussed this whole possibility of providing them with recycled water. And so if you imagine, we're going to, basically with each of the options, it's approximately $5 million more to produce, you know, recycled water. Because you're basically, well, we could go back to the slide, but the delta, here's the CapEx. Yeah, so it's about 5 million, and it gets you up, you know, and then this is just 15 million right from the get-go, but you got the recycled water with it. At any rate, so you'd be spending a lot of money, and in the staff's mind, the only reason why you'd want to do recycled water, and why most agencies do recycled water, is to offset the demand for potable water. So we asked Mr. Jackson, hey, if we provided you with recycled water, would you therefore significantly reduce the pumping of your river wells, and that would free up water for Solvang to pump our river wells more. So the water that they didn't take from the river underflow, we could take and use for potable use in the city. Well, basically he said no, and I don't know if he's still here, but yeah, he could clarify if he'd like, you know, if he would like, if I'm misunderstanding anything, or I don't want to misquote him or anything, but at any rate, they're interested in expanding their agricultural production, and so they would be willing to take the recycled water for expanded agricultural production, but not reduce pumping of the river wells. So it wouldn't offset any potable use for us and free up potable water. Dean, if you could go back to the recycled water map. Yeah. So all of these areas, the only area that's actually in the city limits is A3, which is the ranch course, golf course, and then C1 is Hans Christian Andersen Park, and C2, which is actually off the slide, yeah, that's Sunny Fields Park. So to get the water out there, you're pumping from the low point to the high point, so it's and it's further out, so the distribution system, the cost goes way up, and your power, you know, operating costs go way up. So the most beautiful place to send the recycled water is A1, A2, and A3. But again, if that's not going to offset their potable use, then what's the point? We just, you know, it's just like sending the water, it's like constructing a bunch of green belts everywhere and irrigating that so everything looks green, but you're still, when you have a drought now, you're making everybody cut back and everything because you're just using recycled water to irrigate, you know, whatever. Hopefully I'm making my point. But the other thing is, even if Alisal Ranch was willing to cut back pumping of the river wells, there's no way we could guarantee that ID1, who has their wells upstream, couldn't just pump it out and take it before it got to us. So right now, if Alisal Ranch is trying to pump their river wells, and they aren't able to pump the necessary amount from those wells, they get on the phone, they call ID1 and say, hey, you guys got to cut back because you're drawing everything down, you're sucking it out, and we have prior rights. So if we provide them with recycled water and they did irrigate the golf courses, and let's say, just for discussion, they stop pumping their river wells, and where they're ready to take it, well, we can't guarantee that ID1's not just going to pump their wells more and take it before it gets to us. So, so alternative 3 is definitely the superior alternative with the water quality, the ease of operation, everything. But it's $5 million or more. So, you know, we had these discussions with Andy and his team, and that, you know, so that's some of the comments he's made is because of the conversations we've had, and so the staff, we really can't recommend alternative 3. You know, it's up to the city council to make the final decision. If they really want to pursue the recycled water, then that's great. Staff will do. I mean, clearly, alternative 3 is the superior alternative. It's got the most advantages, the fewest disadvantages. You produce recycled water, but the last thing I wanted to cover was the financial aspect, and we included in the staff report, this was just very preliminary, but you know, if you bond for an $8 million project versus a $15 million project, you basically have $100 a year up to $450 a year increase in the sewer bill for our typical residential customer. So that's approximately $8 to $38 a month increase in their bill. So in our analysis of all this, and because of the sensitivity of water rates, and our last water rate study basically went down in flames, and you know, the staff is trying our best to, you know, discern and understand what's our key issues and important to the city council and provide that information. So we're providing that, and we can give, this was just done at a preliminary level. We could come back and provide more details to the impact to our customers on their actual monthly sewer rate. But anyway, so again, alternative 3 is the superior alternative, but it's so much more expensive, we just, you know, we can't recommend that. And so that brings us to alternative 2, which is far superior than alternative 1. And I meant to introduce our wastewater staff. Hopefully you've all met them. Nathan Giacinto is our wastewater supervisor, wastewater division supervisor and plant superintendent, and Paul Matsoukas is our lead plant operator. So if you have specific questions on the operations or why they agree with our staff and our consultant that these SBRs are really a problem, and we really can't recommend continuing with those. But I did want to clarify 2 other things. The water does flow into the percolation ponds. There's no water that, you know, Andy said it goes right into the river, but actually into the river underflow, it percolates down. So I didn't want anybody to have a misunderstanding of that. We do not send any water into the river. So it all goes into the percolation ponds. And then he mentioned about a fire. Actually, it was an electrical explosion. So
sounds much better.
Just an explosion.
So
that's understandable.
The staff report mentions this, not an electrical explosion, but we have really antiquated electrical equipment, and they're all in special cabinets. And there was an electrical device that exploded. Unfortunately, has special enclosure, but the door of that cabinet like burst out, and we had to do some kind of emergency repairs and redo all that. So, but that's just like an indication. It's all like 20-year plus. A lot of the equipment is 20-year plus old, and anyway, so. So I think that covers what I wanted to do, except for the recommendation. So we'd like you to accept the report, and then make a decision between recycle water or not. And so that would basically be alternative 3 if you want to pursue recycle water, alternative 2A if we don't, or alternative 2 there in the middle. And then because it takes so long and we have multiple things that we'll have to be working on related to this, we'd like you to direct us to proceed with the environmental work and the engineering work. And so, for example, depending on the capacity and the size of the project, we might have to amend our agreement with San Ynez Community Services District. We'll have to look at that. We'll also have to go to Los Olivos and talk to them to see if they want to, participate with the cost and sort of buy in to capacity in the plant. But we really can't wait to get all those answers to start, because there's, some issues with the plant, as we tried to explain. So we'd like to get started on kind of multiple fronts and, begin to move forward with the environmental work and the engineering work, and then, look into these agreements and those things. But, and if you would like, we can take a more closer look at the exact impact to the ratepayers of the one of these projects with the 1.7 MGD or 2 MGD capacity, or whatever capacity we want to pursue. But so that concludes the staff report. And again, I think the most important decision we're hoping you can make tonight is whether or not you want to proceed in the direction towards recycled water or not. So,
Thank you. Does anybody have a question of the staff report?
Go ahead.
Would you like to start, Neil? Go ahead. Go.
I just wanted to, if it's cool with the operators, I'd like to have them come up, and I'd like to hear firsthand just any and all thoughts on what's going on. And yeah, you guys are the ones there on the ground.
Nathan. I want to mention as they come up, everything I know about the wastewater treatment plant I learned from those guys. I've been on several tours there, and I've picked up a lot of good stuff. These guys are really pros at what they do.
Okay. What do you want to know?
What are we doing, or what's going on down there, and what should we do?
Well, right now the plant, we're currently within the limits that they're going to set for us with the existing plant, barely. So as long as nothing changes in flow between now and forever, it'll work barely. So the aeration system in the plant right now is currently undersized, so you can't get enough oxygen into the tanks to treat it the way it needs to be treated. That's one of the problems. The other is the flow equalization. You can have one tank that gets all of the loading for the day, like all of the strength of the wastewater comes in one shot, and then the other tanks don't get anything at night. So it essentially almost kills one tank while it overworks the other, and it's kind of a constant process that way. So it doesn't really work very well. Let me think. The current mixing pumps that are in there, they're made by one company in China. It takes a year to get one, and they're the only ones that make it. So there's that problem. The scum that you guys have all been out there, right? The scum on the top is a place where the certain bacteria grows that cause the tanks to not settle very well. And these tanks are not designed for any removal of that. That's been a problem for 20 years. So if you want to do recycled water, the MBRs are definitely the way to go. They're really simple and they work really well. San Ynez will tell you that, and they have one. The second option of clarifiers is a system that's been around since the beginning of wastewater. It works. It takes very little modification for any of these things that need to be done, and you can also add recycled water to that later, but obviously at that cost.
All right. So yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. So what's your recommendation? What are you thinking as far as, are you in full agreement with staff recommendation?
Yeah, I mean, we all talked about this beforehand.
Yeah, okay.
Definitely the easiest way to produce recycled water is the MBR, for sure.
Gotcha, okay.
But the easiest one to operate for a long period of time would be the second one, if you were not doing recycled water.
All right. Cool, thank you.
All right.
Right on.
Before you go away, the undersized jets and the underpowered or overpowered motors that are a problem, can they be replaced today?
They could be replaced. We would have to go back out of compliance in order to do it, because we'd have to shut a tank down for that whole system to be put in. But yes, they could be replaced.
Okay, yeah, so it could be an individual thing. So we could, in case there's a big delay and we want to do something, we could replace those.
There was a big delay. That system could be replaced to be more efficient.
Okay.
We even had a quote to do it at one point.
Cool. Thank you, Nathan.
Approximately how much was that cost for that quote? Just rough.
I honestly don't remember.
I can probably help with that part. So yeah, I think to go in, as he mentioned, and replace the aerators in the bottom of the tank, you've got to empty one of the 3 basins. You've got to put that somewhere or else be out of compliance. To put in new diffusers in all 3 of those and replace all the blower packages could be close to $1 million. It's a big upgrade. The blowers are kind of improperly sized in 1993. They're too big a blower or too small a motor. And then the diffuser systems, as I showed you those bubbles, they're shot. So those blowers and diffusers on all 3 options have to be fixed.
And there's no payoff on doing that in terms of like buying a few more years out of a current plant or anything?
It definitely helps with your current plant, but I didn't really explain very well earlier. The bathtubs that you have are too small. They're only 1 million gallons. On an SBR tank, you want to have 24 hours of retention time.
Got it.
So you'd like to have a 1.5 million gallon system, but they only gave these guys a 1.0. So you're working with small bathtubs right now. We've got to build tanks, whether the tanks are square, rectangular, circular. I presented a bunch of options to build tanks, unless you do membranes. If you do membranes, that sort of solves everything.
Right. Okay.
Any other questions of Nathan? Thank you, Nathan. Thanks very much.
Yeah, so, Mr. Mayor, if you don't mind, I just wanted to clarify. So, all the way through this process, Nathan and Paul and their staff have been very, very involved. And the absolute last thing I would ever want to do is try to push, have Pace and me push them towards some answer that we like. No, I mean, I'm highly focused on the operators. And they're the ones who have to operate the plant and make us compliant and do the day-to-day grunt work. So I want them to be very satisfied, and I basically kind of consider them my client, because if I give them something that's garbage, I mean, Nathan told me, he said, I don't want a state-of-the-art piece of crap when we're done. And so we're not going to give them that.
So to speak.
So I just want you to know they've been very involved, and what they have to say has been taken very seriously and important by me and our consultant.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, I just I understand where the deal breaks down with regard to exchanging recycled water for Alisol reducing their pumping. But is there anything in the sense that if we were to actually purchase and receive water from Alisol and then sell them recycled water, that it wouldn't reduce the pumping out of their well?
A water swap.
Oh, kind of more like along those lines. So right, I think what you're describing was they stop pumping their well, we give them recycled water, and that allows us to pump more out of our well.
Correct.
And that brings up the other concerns upstream that make that deal break down. But if Alisol were to still use their well and then deliver the water to Solvang, and we pay for that, and then we sell them back our recycled water, does that make that pan out better at all?
I believe, and maybe our city attorney can speak to this, but with riparian rights, I don't believe they're allowed to export the water. So that
There's also cross jurisdictional issues that LAFCO would have to take up if we're serving any kind of water outside the city limits for that purpose. So I'm not going to say it can't be done. It's just going to add some complication from the legal side of it, wholly apart from the engineering of it.
Okay. It seemed like it was attractive before, so if something like that could be done, then
Yeah,
that might be a fix to the...
Actually, if you know Stu Gildred, he has a couple wells on his property. He approached the city several years ago about selling us water, and that was kind of at the beginning of the drought. And at that point, we looked at that and determined that legally we couldn't do that.
Got it. And is there a better place in the study that points me to like what cost we would have to sell recycled water at in order to break even on it?
Sure. Yeah. We'll give you that reference.
Yeah. Okay. I presume it's more like the extra $5 million capital cost plus the operational cost and.
Right. It's the extra $5 million capital cost, which is shown right here. That's at the plant itself. And then if you fast forward to, reverse to this slide, assuming we were going to Alisal, it'd be an extra $1.5 million on top of the treatment plant for the pipe to connect to Alisal, for the pump station to pump it over there, and for a storage tank as well. And then there's a detail in here as far as the OpEx goes. But the OpEx really wasn't that different. So here's the operational cost difference. So to go from not making recycled water in these two options to making recycled water in this option, you're going to add on another, 7 or 8% to this cost and about 13% from this cost. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Are there any other questions?
So I'm trying to look at my list here. Oh, so which plant has the highest lifespan? Does that play into any of the considerations here? Like, I was also looking for, like, is there any kind of like 20-year LCC on option 2 and 3 compared?
Yeah, we have a life cycle cost in here, a 30-year life cycle cost, which is another one of these identical bar graphs, and it's in this report. And you guys can keep, I only have one copy with me, but you can have it after this if you want. But essentially, they're not that far off. These purple options life cycle costs are all very similar. In fact, I think the MBR had the lowest life cycle cost of the 3 purple options. Yeah, about the same, okay.
Based on 30 years.
Based on 30 years. But when you look at the life of the facility, that was in the OpEx. So the OpEx includes chemicals, power, labor. Right. It also includes maintenance, replacement of the membranes, replacement of the tanks long term. It includes all of that. Mm-hmm. So it's a repair and replacement factor.
Right. That's what I'm trying to look at, that determine which, because it's about the looking into the future as well, and even like what we're seeing with our current plant designed for 1.5 million gallons per day, going down to nearly half capacity a day because of some changes in regulations, et cetera. I just want to make sure that whatever we do tomorrow has the longest lifespan on it. They're not some other mandate regulation that comes down 3 years from now, and now we have to do some major multi-million-dollar upgrade to one of these options.
Right. I actually want to clarify something that I think there's a little bit of confusion. When I said that the capacity of the plant went from 1.5 to 0.9, that is a little bit confusing because actually everybody's putting in low flow fixtures in their houses. It's really the number of houses stays about the same.
Right.
So the number of houses that were originally planned in 1993 and the number of houses that are online here are about the same. It's just that the flow per house went down. So it wasn't like we all of a sudden just lost a bunch of capacity.
And I understand that,
okay, I just want to
but I also understand that, or what I just heard earlier was a large part of this is because of the denitrification process.
Yes,
that's
that's
really
true.
slowing us down. So what I'm really looking for is, in these 3 options that are here, which one has the lowest risk for some additional regulation? Some other...
Great question. So these 2 things really do standard 100-year-old treatment. They use biological treatment. The bugs eat the contaminants. They get settled out, and you go through. The MBR is different. The MBR actually uses, it's called a long SRT or sludge age. The bugs get so starved that they'll eat pharmaceuticals and caffeine and Prozac and all these different things, and they prepare the water to be advanced treated, and then you filter it with a 0.05 micron, which is 0.00001 or 5 millimeter. That's how small the pore size is. The water looks just like your bottled water right there.
Right.
And so you're set up to do advanced treatment if you needed to get rid of selenium or copper or arsenic or salt or whatever it is.
And that's exactly what I'm talking about, because I'm worried about some other new California,
So are we.
regulation coming down tomorrow. And next thing you know, we got to get all the Prozac out of the water.
Right, right, exactly. Yeah, whatever that happens to be.
Sorry if that's a downer for anyone, but
And you could do that with these other bars here, but you'd have to tack on additional equipment.
Right.
So this bar would go up to there. And now this MBR is a better option. I meant to bring that up, so I'm glad you brought that point up.
How much of the water is reusable as far as, like, is it 100 acre feet or 1,000 acre feet to 1,000 acre feet, or is there a loss in
The only
reusable?
loss is the sludge is the bug. So when the bugs grow a lot, you have to get rid of some of them or else you have too many bugs. And so a very small amount, less than 1%, becomes a cake. And that cake's dry, but it gets hauled off site to be fertilizer or landfill. So basically it's 99.x%.
Okay, so I completely understand Mr. Jackson's concerns, and what I see are a number of different parties involved in influencing our decision as to which type of system that we would want to use. A couple of my concerns are we haven't consulted the other cities, or we have not consulted Los Olivos, we have not consulted Ballard. We don't know what their participation would be. Second concern is I don't know exactly what is our wastewater fund reserve right now. What do we have right now? If maybe Sandra might know, or what do we have available right at this moment?
Sandra's here.
I want to say about 10 million, but some of that's invested in assets, so probably about 5 million.
So there, it's invested in assets?
5 million unrestricted.
Okay. My concern here is that we've known that this is a problem for quite a long time, and I have to agree with our staff back there that they want to wind up with a system that works really efficiently, and we want to be able to pay for the best system. However, since my big concern is putting the cost of this on the people and the citizens of Solvang, when we've known that this has been a problem for quite a while. So, and we do have quite a bit of a reserve fund. So I'm just kind of looking at it right now, and I'm not sure that I'm ready to make a decision as to what specific treatment plan we should go with. I'm leaning towards recycle, but I can't make that decision yet because I just don't have all of the information in front of me.
Any other comments?
Well, okay, just if I could add, yeah, Councilmember Toussaint's question is an excellent one. The MBRs that would produce this high-quality water and the recycled water is the best option in terms of reducing our risk relative to future unknown regulatory changes. So, as I mentioned, it is definitely the superior alternative. We have known about the problems, and we've been working on them the whole time. All this stuff, it takes time, and the study took a while to get into all the details, and so we've been working on it diligently. So if the council as a whole is uncomfortable making a decision as far as recycled water versus not recycled water, basically alternative 3 or alternative 2, what I would ask of you is to provide me a list of questions that you have that you'd like answers to, and as best as we can, the staff will try to get those answers and bring it back to you so that then you feel comfortable that you do have the information. But I can tell you, as far as Ballard and Los Olivos, I mean, I could go there tomorrow and meet with their general manager, or go to their next board meeting, and, they're not going to be able to tell us yes or no for probably 2 years. Honestly, if you're really honest about it, I mean, they're trying to figure out what they got to build and how much it's going to cost for the sewer collection system, and where they're going to buy a piece of property to put the treatment plant if they don't send their waste down here. And I mean, it's a giant can of worms. I mean, and to work through all that is going to take a long time. So, sadly, I think you might be faced with a situation where you need to make a decision where, unfortunately, you might not have all the answers to everything that you'd like to have. And we'll do our best, but I'm just using that as an example because, they got so many issues they're going to be dealing with just over the next year, just starting up and everything. So it's it's highly unlikely they're going to be able to give us an answer for quite a while.
Okay, and then I just have one very specific question for our staff in the back who run the plant. Yes, if you could come forward and answer, that would be great.
Are you on overtime, Nathan? Come on, I mean, really. We want you to be here as long as you want, so please.
So Nathan, what would be your reservation going with the full-on MBR versus the clarifiers?
Have you been to the casino plant yet?
No, I have not seen the casino plant.
The only concern I have with the MBR is, for one, it's unfamiliar. It's newer technology. There's an awful lot of chemical injection and membrane cleaning involved in that, where the clarifier process is very simple, very few moving parts. You got to clean the clarifiers, you got to spray them off once in a while, but it's nothing like an MBR. The MBR works really well, but you have to chlorinate the membranes every so often. I think every 10 years the membranes are supposed to be replaced. It's the unknown.
Is that a reverse osmosis process in reality?
No.
No, it isn't.
But it definitely works really well. And I don't have any reservation other than it might be a waste of money if we're not going to do recycled water.
Okay, but you and your staff are fully certified and capable of running a system like that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Hey, Nathan, that was not an insult, really. No, I know my comment. Oh. Hey, I had a question or two. If everybody else is done with their questions, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Okay. My primary concern is who's going to pay for this, and your comments about Los Olivos isn't going to get on board for a while. What about Ballard? And because Ballard is part of the county's going to have to get on board. There's going to have to be a pipeline pulled down Alamo Pintado Road, which is going to be in the millions probably to run that. And we still have to satisfy the Santa Ynez Valley, Santa Ynez CSD. And I'm concerned that all that cost is going to be loaded on 20% to them and the rest to us as ratepayers. And I'm concerned that the bond issues and all those sorts of things are going to dramatically increase our water bill, because that's what they see is our water bill because the sewage is on it. Mm-hmm. So there's got to be some way to satisfy it. And that's the reason I asked that question about redoing those jets and motors, is because we could do that, spend $1 million and wait several years until all this spreads out to where we can afford, to where we can decide who's going to pay for what. Or is the buy-in going to be too expensive for Los Olivos and Ballard to buy in, and then we're stuck with the whole thing also? So those are the questions that I have.
Sure. Those are very good questions, and questions you definitely should have, all of you, and I'm sure you all do. So just let me speak to a couple things. If Ballard and Los Olivos were going to bring their wastewater or have their wastewater treated at our plant, they would have to bring it all the way down here
That's
to
correct.
us. So
Yeah,
we
that's-
wouldn't have to pay for any of that. So just, you
Right,
know,
that's
just-
their
just to
pipeline,
clarify,
but
'cause-
that's their cost.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So it's definitely an option to do the very minimum right now, completely redo the blower aeration system. You know, we would like to redo the office and lab and all the because all the electrical equipment's in there. So we could come back with like a minimalist project just to help us so we can denitrify properly and address the more major issues, but keep costs to the minimum, and wait for a few years till we can, you know, go through the agreement and amend it with, if necessary, with San Ynez Community Services. Let Los Olivos figure out what they want to do, and, you know, we could write them a letter and present the information and get on their agenda and kind of get that ball moving. The only thing is you might get down the road 5-7 years and be right back here, and you just spent $2 million or $2.5 million or whatever it might be, because it's going to be at least a few million to do the very minimalist project, and so you might end up ripping out that relatively brand new stuff because it has a 25 to 30 year life. So that's what we were thinking to hope to avoid, but yeah, and definitely the question of the cost to our customers is super important, and that's why, you know, staff really doesn't have a strong recommendation between alternative 3 and alternative 2, because, you know, alternative 3 is superior, but
And
there's
I
the
just
whole
wanted to
cost.
interject.
Yeah.
I think I maybe misspoke when I said that you could do that minimalist project, because the more I think about it, the aerators and the blowers are going to be different for options 1, 2, and 3.
I'm glad you clarified that,
Yeah,
because
there's a chance you could try to make it work, but in reality, you're better off selecting 1, 2, or 3 now before you go and change the aerators and the blowers.
so are you saying that if we selected an option and then went with those blowers and aerators, that we could put those in and then continue on with this process several years down the pike?
Yeah, if you knew which of those 3 options you were going to choose, you could do a minimalist project now and then wait and do more on that later. But just guessing which one you're going to do and putting in blowers and aerators,
Right, okay.
there's a chance, like he said, you'd have to reconfigure or rip out or do things with what you
Thank you for that. That's the kind of information I was looking for. One other thing, I noticed that your 80-foot diameter basins, you're anticipating acquiring land to the east. Is there any reason you can't use those areas that you show on your other maps as on the current footprint? For example, that's why I asked about the size of that parking lot. An 80-foot diameter tank could be very well easily put in that same process, or even in those other drying ponds.
We were there 6 months ago. We actually, yeah, I'm sorry about that. Yeah, thanks for that question. So the question was, you know, why not consider putting the clarifiers in these big open spaces? And we were there 6 or 8 months ago. That's exactly where we wanted to put them. But after thinking about it more critically, by the time you put in 2 80-foot clarifiers with the 15 or 20-foot access road around both sides, you need a little bit of land anyway. And you want it to be symmetrical. So the water that comes off of 1, 2, and 3 has about the same travel distance to get to each one of these. So in a perfect world, you want them here. And since you have to acquire a little bit of land anyway, and this land was relatively inexpensive, we might as well do it right and acquire the land we needed.
Yeah, thank you for that guess. Hey, CJ, you're on the spot now. Hey, and that brings me to another question about the recycled water. CJ, you were going to put a reservoir up on that slope to water the alfalfa. Is that still going to happen? Do you think there could be an equitable trade with recycled water versus the cost of you building that reservoir and then pumping to it?
That's a remarkably complex question.
I'm sorry?
That's a remarkably
involves a host of subjects, a host of issues that you have yet to deal with. You've mentioned them in passing, but there are a host of them that you haven't digested and clarified.
For the television audience, he's not on a mic. We're hearing what he's saying, but I don't mean to really put you on the spot, but those are kind of valid questions, I think.
Well, there are a host of elements of why I might feel I'm on the spot right now. Okay, I showed up. I probably could have stayed home. The challenge you have here is you folks have a crisis. I'm your immediate neighbor. Now I'm talking to you, right? We didn't have a discussion as this developed. We already have an interrelationship. And so to suddenly have a discussion, your council spoke about riparian rights and transferability and a host of issues. I haven't broached those. I looked at on the web your study. I have a sense of it. Tonight I have a sense of the urgency of your study. I was going to come speak to you, having been a planning commissioner, about the Santa Barbara Ranch. And the reason was that we had to take a very large thing and digest it in pieces so as to come to reasonable conclusions, to submit to a decision maker, to evaluate across the range of issues you people have to deal with here. And it feels like you're kind of at the beginning, but you're backed up against the wall to an extent of having to make a decision tonight. And I was invited at this stage of the game. I am a neighbor. I don't own the property. It's a family situation, so I have a boss. So anything that I would say here would likely need to be covered with my, certainly, and evaluated, and there be a program, and there be an understanding. Halfway through this presentation, or two-thirds through the way, you mentioned that there was going to need to be some land acquired. So I'm hearing that now. So if you walked into a situation like this, knowing that potentially we might find some opportunities to work together, but this is the starting point. I'm at the starting point. You're already facing a crisis, it looks like. I'm trying to determine. So I had, in terms of the reservoir, we had a balancing reservoir is a way where we would pump water from our wells into a balancing reservoir, pump at night when electrical costs are low, irrigate, and refill. So that was the basis there. We did not go forward with that project. A balancing reservoir might be a vehicle for irrigating with your wastewater product. I don't know. It's an expensive proposition. Sometimes it requires environmental review, et cetera. If we were to take wastewater from you in whatever stage it is, there would be costs and infrastructure and a host of decisions that we would need to make. So I'm not ready to say no, but I'm certainly not ready to say yes. I would have been, when I mentioned the Santa Barbara Ranch, I think you have an enormous something to study here with a host of impacts. And in a 3-hour city council meeting, the likelihood that you will touch all those bases. I mean, we took 16 meetings to digest a 1,200-acre site for the Santa Barbara Ranch, from environmental conclusions to species, et cetera, et cetera. But what it meant was we had a structure in place to digest large items. I think you need, as I may have said a few months ago, you need to develop a process and a capacity to evaluate and complete something instead of trying to race to an answer within a specified time frame. There are a host of things that I would love to hear more of. I'm not here to say we're not interested, but riparian rights are a complex issue, and we have a riparian right to our water, and we have to utilize those within the rubric under which those are provided and presented. Those are our rights. We have to preserve those. You know from dealing with us that we're probably, on any decision we make, we seek out legal advice, we seek out consultants, and we study and we work through things. And I encourage you to do the same. So I don't have any answers. I'm interested in talking. I think about much of what the Valley Blueprint attempted to do, God forbid, is it really 22 years ago? To have present at the table the Ballard contingent, the Los Olivos contingent, all of that, so that these issues don't arrive at everyone's doorstep at the crisis point. It looks like there are a lot of factors you have to juggle and evaluate. That's, as a coming here, I don't come to all your meetings all the time. They're pleasant, but I have a job, so sometimes I have to do that stuff. But I think you've got a very big thing to evaluate here. You do have a neighbor who I live here, so I would strive to find ways to work together. But you've got to understand my constraints as well as me try to understand yours. And this is early in the game. And I worry because you'll have a transition at this seat at the table. You need all your cylinders working.
Thank you, CJ, for coming up. I really appreciate that. I think you've enlightened us immensely. Thank you. Well, those, my friends, are all the questions I have. So with that, we'll go to the public for public comment. Nick, you're up.
My name is Nick DeCroce. I'm a Solvang resident now already for 20 years. I live in Creekside. I usually represent California trout. I recently joined We Watch, so I guess I'm part of We Watch tonight as well. I have a 20-year background in state water issues. I have been a member of the Public Advisory Committee for the State Water Plan in the past. I was a leader of an Environmental Water Caucus that included 32 environmental organizations, all with a common interest in California state water issues. And it included national organizations like the Environmental Defense Fund, Natural Resources Defense Council, Sierra Club, regional organizations, and a lot of small organizations as well. We were always high on recycling, reuse, and wastewater treatment options. We always pushed hard for them as opposed to building more dams and building tunnels under the delta. And when I see this opportunity to develop recycled water, we would certainly be in favor of alternative 3. I think what it does is allows you more opportunity for the future when the price of water is going to go sky high, and you would have no problem selling water that you didn't need if you had that opportunity. I sit and fantasize in my chair there thinking about, ooh, a new profit center for Solvang. Wouldn't that be nice? We are in favor of alternative 3 and would like to see you go towards that as a future-looking council. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. CJ, did you want to speak again?
I think I put it all out there.
Oh, thank you. Chris? Did he leave?
Hey, Matt, a quick question. So when do the direct injection standards come out for, isn't there like a goal for standards for being able to directly
Yeah, so you said direct injection. and I think
sorry,
you're mixing two things.
yeah.
So, so the state regulations for indirect potable reuse just recently came out, and the state is still working on the regulations for direct potable reuse. So basically treating it to the super high level and putting it right back into the water pipe. Those, I believe they're behind schedule. I think they were supposed to be coming out in 2023, but I wouldn't expect them till maybe 2024, 2025. But yeah, so they've actually published an approximate target date for those regulations. And I want to say, do you have it?
Actually, they have a draft out of the potable reuse standards right now, and actually our firm is designing one in the city of Santa Monica. It's kind of the first toilet-to-tap sort of facility in Los Angeles. They've got them in San Diego. Our office is in Orange County, but they put it in the ground first. MBR sets you up for that, so Alternative 3 would set you up for that in the future. However, you have to do reverse osmosis. You mentioned reverse osmosis. You have to do that in the current regulations.
That's a tertiary treatment, right?
It's beyond tertiary. It's like step 6.
Really?
So tertiary treatment means the third stage of treatment. Then you have to do steps 4, 5, and 6 to get to drinking water. I've drank the water out of the Orange County Water District's sewage to drinking water plant. But reverse osmosis is the last step of that. And if you do a reverse osmosis here, you have a small amount of salt or brine left over, and we have no place to put that. Until we get a regional brine line to take that to the ocean or take it miles underground, we're stuck because we can't do reverse osmosis here, just like Phoenix can't do reverse osmosis there.
Are you familiar with the Oxnard plant?
I am.
Yeah, they're tertiary treatment, and they say that's toilet to tap.
They have advanced. So advanced is the word that's better than tertiary. The Oxnard plant does advanced, and they have a place to put their brine. They have a brine line that gets it to the ocean.
Oh, okay.
That's the difference. And I know Matt knows more about opportunities to put brine, but that's a regional solution, unfortunately. Reno, Nevada is trying to become the first place in the United States to do that advanced treatment without reverse osmosis, but it's not there yet. So we did look at potable reuse as part of the study, but because we have no place to put the brine, we shelved that for the future. But back to your point, if you want to set yourself up for the future, the MBR would be best suited to go to those advanced treatment steps.
Okay. And approximately how many acre feet of water could be produced on a yearly basis?
Well, what I like to do is 1 million gallons a day is 3 acre feet. So if you have a 1 MGD facility, that's about 1,000 acre feet per year.
Got it.
Does that make sense?
And our current water production is about 1,200 acre feet per year for Solvang, right? Yeah. Okay. So it's like, yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Now we'll go back to the public. Nancy Emerson, followed by Lansing.
Nancy Emerson, a resident of Solvang. I'm interested in potable water, and it was very helpful to hear what was said about that in terms, we're talking long-term rather than near-term. But I am concerned, you know, we get 10% of the Cachuma water for the whole valley through ID1, and that's all. People look at that lake and they think, oh, you know, lots of water, but most of it doesn't come here because of water rights that were arranged a long time ago. And we're dependent in Solvang on wells, what we can buy from ID1 and state water. And I've heard you talk about wishing you could be self-sufficient with water. So my concern is with the long term and looking at water rather than just recycled water, drinking water. But I don't know what to tell you, except that I did think CJ was making some good comments in terms of needing a process to deal with a really complex issue.
Thank you, council members. I'm glad you're working on this. We don't want to wake up one day and find out there's nowhere to put. We need that structure in place to digest, as CJ said. And the problem we face now is the result of an original design that did not take into account changing circumstances. And I think we can expect changing circumstances in the future. Before Ryan brought it up, the top question I had here was, will tertiary treatment ultimately be a requirement for the state? You know, that you're going to have to do this anyway, so why not plan for it now? Take the longer view. Perhaps if there had been a longer view taken before, the situation you are now would not be so acute. One thing, obviously, is that recycled water could provide water that could keep Solvang green in a severe drought. Yes, the piping may be challenging, but you might be the only community around that had landscaping that was green, that had parks, gateways, planters, parking lots where things were green. And then, yeah, right now it may not offset potable water. I mean, that would be an ideal situation, as you can see exactly how the payback is going to come. But I would think the payback may turn out to be really obvious in the future. It could be that the future will result in decreased water in the river wells, such that there's motivation to use that recycled water. There may be people around who, they find pretty soon they do not have that water coming down from Kachuma and rainfall, because with global warming, you can expect that we're going to get less rain and recharge. So going for the one that's going to give you the capability to have recycled water is really planning for a future that I think you can expect. Yes, I think Matt has pointed out that you don't know at this point in time that these other communities are going to be ready to share the costs of this with you, but you know they're going to have a need. And this has been working for a while, and they don't have a solution while you have potentially a solution for them in terms of their treatment. So I think you can anticipate in the long run there will be people, whether it's Ballard or Los Olivos, that will be willing to share in the costs of the treatment that you will have. And then whatever you do not want to rule out option 3. Even if you say, well, in the short term we'll consider this, do not rule out option 3 as the choice that you want to keep alive for yourselves. It makes sense to really plan for the future if you're going to realistically look at what will probably be needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Lansing. Chris, your turn. Public comment? You put a speaker slip in. You don't have to.
Actually, I just want to take a moment to thank the council again for doing this study. This is really amazing and exciting. I know it was something that you guys put a lot of effort and work into. Really impressive stuff. And you already answered my question in the middle of the presentation. It really had more to do with not just current demand, but future demand for water with respect to the growth of the community. And again, that was answered already. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no other speaker slips. Does anyone else wish to comment? Matt?
I just did want to make one last comment. Mr. Duncan had some really good comments, but one was especially, I think, insightful. Right now, the state is going through the process of coming up with the new mandatory conservation requirements for all agencies in California, all water purveyors. And that's probably going to last, so once those new water conservation regulations take into effect, the only thing that I can think of that the state will be able to do after that is, in fact, demand everybody do recycle water. Mm-hmm. So his comment regarding that, there's a very good chance that eventually that every wastewater, public agency who has a wastewater treatment plant will have to be producing recycled water. That's highly likely. I don't know when, but we're running out of other options, you know, and we can't, anybody inland, you can't do seawater desal, right? So you're stuck, you gotta do everything else, so.
Thank you, Matt. I'm in a quandary right now. We still have to discuss this as a council. I don't know that it's going to be rapid. It's 8:45. We have another item on the agenda that I'm concerned about the folks waiting for that too. And I'm wondering if we can take a step back and allow the other people to comment on that next item and table this until after their. Is that an okay thing? Table item 5 until item 6 is complete, and then come back and then discuss the wastewater plant, because it's a complex subject, and I don't think, unless you think you can, come up with a decision or any other comments.
I'd like to move on to 6 and come back to 5.
Is that agreeable? Then let's do that. Let's table 5 and then come back to 6. But in the meantime, let's take a 10-minute break.
I did.
I had my own note.
Yes, I know. This chair was doing this.
No, it's late.
Yeah, it's late. Yeah.
We'll call the meeting back to order. On to item 6.
Item 6, Homeless Emergency Aid Program.
Staff report.
Mr. Mayor and members of the council, what you have before you is a resolution to declare a shelter crisis. The state of California has done a one-time $500 million block grant program that has been set up. It's called HEAP, or that's short for Homeless Emergency Aid Program. Santa Barbara County is eligible for up to $9 million in that program, and that would be for those entities that declare the shelter crisis within their jurisdiction. The County of Santa Barbara has it on their board agenda for tomorrow also. So, as I said, it's going to be about $9 million potentially to come here. Cities will have to have declared a resolution, and that's what we're asking you to do tonight. What that would do is make funding available for use in the city of Solvang by groups like People Helping People that assist people that are homeless or near homelessness and provide resources to them. So what we're asking tonight for you is to adopt the resolution. It in no way makes you request the funding or do any work with homeless. It just gives us the opportunity for that funding to be available for use in the city of Solvang. So that's my staff report.
Are there any questions of the staff report?
Comment? Yes, I believe that we may have inadvertently left out some correspondence from a gentleman who was concerned about us taking funds for this particular purpose, and it was answered. It was in our packet, but I don't think we spoke about it.
No, we hadn't. He's here. He'll be speaking on public comment time. And Hank, you can talk not just yet, but you can talk about anything you like, including reading your letter, or we can read it. Okay. Is there any other comments? Well, then I'll read Hank's letter. Councilman, my name is Hank Homburg. I reside here in Solvang. I'm very concerned about the city adopting the HEAP resolution at this evening's council meeting. The state of California and our esteemed Governor Brown is basically doling out $8 to $9 million taxpayer dollars to Santa Barbara County to be divided up by communities for homeless services, should they have a need. If the city of Solvang adopts this resolution, it is basically taking a portion of that money for its coffers, but it will have strings attached. With the recent local, which is Lompoc, riverbed dwellers being kicked out of their illegal camping area due to rampant crime, drugs, and pollution, they are going to go where the services are. If you accept this resolution, our city will be committed and obligated to provide homeless services. As someone who lived and worked in the city of Santa Barbara, I can tell you firsthand that if you feed them or provide them an accepting stance, they will come. As you know, Solvang's economy is based on tourism. If panhandlers, alcoholics, drug abusers start converging on Solvang's parks and downtown areas, there will be no turning back. Please consider not adopting this resolution and taking the money. It will cost you and all the residents and businesses in the long run. Respectfully submitted, Hank Homburg. That's the letter. Any other comments? Then we'll go to the public. I have one public speaker's comment. Hank. Oh, there's another one up there, too. Two more.
Thank you, Mayor, and council members thank you, Mayor, for reading that letter. Saved me up here to get my general point up to you that I'm not a curmudgeon or anti-homeless in need by any means. If there's someone locally here that's on the edge of homelessness, that's a family and a working family, by all means, I support helping them. But I would have to say, working in public safety for 30 years plus in city of Santa Barbara, probably 90 to maybe even 92% of the homeless population down there are transients from other areas, not even from the state of California, that utilize the services provided by the county and the city of Santa Barbara. So I'm very concerned about us taking the money, because I do believe that Homeless Incorporated, and I kind of lump that together with the charitable organizations as well as the county and city organizations that are involved with the social welfare aspects of homelessness. will expect the city of Solvang to produce. And again, I would hate to see the situation that happened in Lompoc, happen in Buellton or Solvang or St. Inez Valley. It's a shame. I feel bad for a lot of those people. I don't know what the answer is, but the answer for city of Solvang is tourism. And when I listen to the costs incurred for this upcoming water treatment plant, we need our tourists and we need our tourism. And maybe we even need to charge parking, Mayor, sorry, for the tourists to create generate some funds. But I would just hate to see us vote yes on this resolution just because it sounds like the right thing to do, but I think down the road it could affect us in a negative way with impacts that could be really destructive to our town. So thank you for the consideration and thank you for reading my letter. Appreciate it.
Dean Palius, Chief Executive Officer of St. Inez Valley People Helping People. That's a perfect segue. With all due respect, and I don't remember your name, you couldn't be farther from the truth. I've been the executive at People Helping People for nearly 25 years. And for those of you who have lived in Solvang and the St. Inez Valley for at least that amount of time, you'll recognize that you very rarely see people panhandling in this town or any of the other townships in the St. Inez Valley. And the reason for that is People Helping People. For years, many years, probably the whole 25 years I've been there, we've had funding to work with, I think, preventably almost homeless individuals, recently homeless individuals, and chronically homeless individuals. And admittedly, working with the chronically homeless is very difficult in the St. Inez Valley because we don't have services. We're not applying for mental health services here or a shelter or anything like that. But we've been incredibly successful over the years working with people who are families with children who are about to be evicted, helping them stay in their homes, working with them on a case management basis to make sure they can get back to work. Some of these people are women with children, single moms, made homeless or about to be homeless because a husband has left, there's been a workers' comp injury, there's been domestic violence. So we know from experience with the little monies that we've gotten over the years from the city of Solvang, city of Buellton, the county, from emergency solutions grants like they're talking about here to prevent homelessness or to rapidly rehouse somebody, that we literally can save lives and keep families together. And as a last statistic, I'll tell you that I looked today, 7.5% of the kids at Solvang School reported that they're homeless. And I'm pretty sure that's 35 to 40 kids, even at 2 kids per family. That's 20 families who are saying that they're homeless. So there are homeless people hiding in our community, not usually seen, that we could work with these funds. And some of that money, if you looked at the earmarks, are for working with youth. And we'd love to have a program where we can have group counseling and things like that for kids. So it's really a preventive measure to having homeless people on the streets and chronically homeless people, and I would hope that you would vote for this emergency declaration.
Thank you, Dean.
Thank you.
Kimberly Alvis.
Mayor Richardson and council members, I am the Homeless Assistance Program Manager for the County of Santa Barbara, and again, Kimberly Albers, and just really appreciate both Hank's comments and Dean's. This funding will go through my office at the Housing and Community Development Division, and so it really is as simple for the city of Solvang. For Los Angeles and San Diego and others taking this money, they'll have very complex issues to deal with. But here, it really is what I really appreciated what Hank said, that he has no problem with helping people who are already here in the community if they need some help. And so we anticipate People Helping People to apply for what we call rapid rehousing and homeless prevention dollars. That means someone already here in the county with like a senior with a fixed income that has a high percentage going towards rent, that she may have a car payment or a car repair that makes it where she can't pay her rent for a couple of months. If the resolution, Governor Brown came up with a very strange process, but if you do not adopt the resolution, then when that woman calls People Helping People a year from now, that senior on a fixed income, if she's living within the city of Solvang, they would not be able to provide rental assistance to her. We are not talking about mass meal programs or shelters or anything being added to the services here, but just giving People Helping People. In fact, they applied for funding earlier this year, and because our funding had been reduced significantly at the county for the Emergency Solutions Grant, we were not able to fund them for 4 families for rapid rehousing. Well, 4 families not being assisted may not sound like much, but it really is, for those 4 families, that's life-changing and takes those kids off the street. So I really don't think you are being obligated or committed to provide any additional services than People Helping People is already trying to provide now. It just gives them the resources to help the residents within your own boundaries.
Wait, before you go.
Yes.
Maybe you should explain the program a little bit more clearer.
Yeah.
That, you know, are we in actuality a pass-through for the state dollars?
No, so we would be the pass-through at the County of Santa Barbara in the homeless assistance programs. We're the administrative entity for the continuum of care. And so, like I said, in Governor Brown and his staff's strange process, they are the ones mandating that anywhere the funds coming through the county pass through be spent, that they've declared this shelter crisis. And I think in hearing more about it, we've attended some recent webinars. The governor's intent was really to get cities and counties working together to talk about this issue. But it's a very odd process, right? Having you all have to declare this shelter crisis in order for the funds to be used. But it really is that simple. We're not with a big agenda. I am part of Homeless Incorporated here in the county, and I really do want to say that, I mean, the integrity of this program will run through my department, and I just really don't want to have a woman on the phone a year from now asking for assistance and me saying she can't receive the assistance.
I guess I don't fully understand.
Okay.
I don't fully understand our position in this. Why do we have to make a resolution? Does that say that we're going to be able to donate that money or to honor grants?
No,
grant
the only thing you're doing tonight is setting the resolution so that, I don't think, is that correct, Brad? City has no interest in applying for the funding.
Right. This would just be
There are other cities in the county may actually decide to apply directly for funding. Here in the city of Solvang, your resolution is only making it where a nonprofit provider already serving in your community can apply for the funding, and if someone in your community needs rental assistance in order to keep their housing or get back into housing, we could not let that provider use that funding in the city of Solvang unless the resolution for the declaration of shelter crisis is done. So it's a strange process and bureaucratic process but again, I think Governor Brown, the hope was to get cities and counties talking, but the declaration of shelter crisis does seem like a strange formality and wording to put everyone through, but that's all it does, is it allows providers already working in your community to pay for rental assistance during the 2.5-year one-time grant funding period.
We don't write the check then?
You don't write the check.
Is there any questions while we have her?
Comment. Actually, to me, and no offense to People Helping People who provide a great service to this community and surrounding communities, this sounds like a horrible policy to have to restrict People Helping People to be able to give funds to people in need. We, as a council, grant fund People Helping People. We, as a council, give money every year to services to help people in this community in need. So I don't understand why we can't continue to do that, and why a woman in this town or a man or a child in this town in need couldn't just go straight to People Helping People or United Way or any of these services that we already provide money to and get money. Why would the state or the county step in and cut that off and prohibit that?
So I don't think they're prohibiting any of the funding that you just described. This is we haven't had homelessness prevention dollars in very significant, besides trace amounts in the county, since 2012. So I think we're talking about this specific funding, which is a very large amount of surge funding that could really make an impact in homelessness prevention services, allow them to help more people for longer term, to help them be more stable. So it in no way prohibits you from doing what you're already doing with existing funds. But if these funds, if people helping people was to apply for these funds, which I believe they are, or another local service provider, if they receive the funds from the state through the county, which the county is not the one making the rules here. I want to make sure that's very clear. This is a state policy that they're saying unless the jurisdiction has declared the shelter crisis, that rental assistance funds, rental subsidies could not be used in the city limits. So I realize it is not the way we would have chosen to write the policy, and we were surprised when it came down that way, and there's been a lot of questions to the state of why, and like I said, the only thing we're getting back is sort of this forced collaboration and coordination, so it does not prevent you from spending dollars you're already spending in any way.
Well, in a way it would, because if we were to go ahead and take this funding, then we may be less likely to give out grant funding, because we may have to wait to see whoever asks for the grant funding if we're allowed to give it to them. If you're taking individuals in need that have to go through people helping people, and people helping people is restricted in giving them funds because we haven't applied for this program, how is that good? Why wouldn't those people come straight to the city of Solvang?
Maybe clarify, the people helping people could still assist Solvang residents, they just couldn't use this pot of money to assist Solvang residents.
And that's state policy for the funding, not county driven.
So we're only addressing the state pot of money, it doesn't restrict any of the grant funds that we currently give, or what people helping people wants to do with them.
Okay, so basically, if we were to continue to grant to other organizations, then if somebody in need called, let's say they didn't call, or they went through the process that you're saying, and they needed assistance, and we did not apply for this funding, the other organization wouldn't be able to give it to them?
That's correct.
Yeah, so basically it does restrict what the other organizations can give to them.
This funding.
Give any of this funding. They still have other funding.
They can still
But
give
this
their
is,
own funding.
They can still give their own funding to the people. That's what they're doing now. This is just a benefit to people helping people. It's extra money.
Okay, I just didn't want to, I didn't like the idea of having strings attached to having charitable organizations being able to give out funds to people in need.
And I think that the reason that I'm here tonight and very much enjoyed the water treatment plant was because we want every jurisdiction within the county to declare the shelter crisis, so no resident will have to be said, oh, you have to live here or you have to be here to be helped. We're just following the state regs to where if we all declare, all 8 incorporated cities, and all 8 incorporated cities have it calendared on their city council, it goes before the Board of Supervisors tomorrow, then no one will have to be asked where they live or what city or where their address is. Everyone can be helped with these funds, and that's what you're voting on tonight. It's that opportunity.
One second, Dean.
Yeah.
As I read this resolution, it says we're going to declare there are homeless people within our city.
There are.
Do we know that?
I think Dean has some statistics. Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to find out.
Yeah, so it's a limited number. I think you'll definitely see that more people in your community would benefit from the prevention funding, like how Hank mentioned about people who about to fall out of their housing. You certainly would have probably more use for that funding, which is a prioritized use for this funding at the county level.
So this $8 or $9 million is going to be divided within the entire county. We may not get a dime of it because it'd be used up somewhere else within the county?
You know, I think there's a real commitment. The local Continuum of Care Board met on August 28th, and there's a commitment to make sure that it is distributed throughout the county. But again, the state regulation would prevent it from being spent in the city of Solvang to someone needing rental assistance if the declaration of shelter crisis is not proclaimed. And that is not county policy. I want to make sure I'm on the record.
So are you telling us that that's the only purpose that money is going to go to, is for shelter housing, not for transportation out of town or any other kind of services that the homeless would need?
No, so I think that local service providers can apply for the funding through the local Continuum of Care, and they would be awarded funding for different activities.
Lack of food or something like that, or medication or medical emergencies, would it cover that?
I don't think meals are not part of the, these are housing focused services, but absolutely if there was, if you had a provider that wanted to provide transportation, or I think they call it family restoration program, where you're getting someone back to their family, that could be something a local provider could apply for.
Is the primary focus of the program, is it more of a prevention thing to keep people that are on the verge of becoming homeless?
It's definitely both. We have, in other areas of the county, we have very large, literally homeless populations and chronic homeless populations where rapid rehousing and acquisition of housing units to help move people into would be a focus. Here in Solvang, given, meeting with Dean and Arcelia and hearing from you all, it sounds like prevention would be more the focus, and I believe that's their attempt. That would be what they'd be applying for.
Understood.
With rapid rehousing dollars.
Thank you, Kimberly. I'm going to give Dean equal time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, I really appreciate your consideration.
Thank you.
I don't need equal time. I think we finally have it explained. Dean Palias, People Helping People, back again. This is additional funding to People Helping People on top of what the city of Solvang, the city of Buellton, and the county of Santa Barbara already provide to People Helping People, but the amount that we can directly provide for rental assistance, for first and last month's rent to help people move into new quarters has been very limited. You said since what, 2012? Yeah, it's been a long time. We've been relying on private resources and your resources to help. And that's maybe we can spend $6,000 or $8,000 a year for rental assistance. We all know what the rent's here. That's maybe 3-4 families. We get one of our biggest partners, St. Vincent de Paul at the Mission. A lot of times they'll match our funds, so we're talking about maybe $16,000 a year. That needs to be at least double that, if not 2.5 times that. Right now, we have a senior woman living in a car in Solvang, and we have a couple living in a car in Solvang that we can't help because we don't have funds yet for rental assistance. So this is an addition. And then I think one of the great things about People Helping People, not my particular vision, but I bought into it right away, is we're a multi-programmatic and service industry. So if someone comes to us, they don't just come to us because they need rental assistance. They're going to need food. Who mentioned it? They're going to need medication. They need to go to the doctor. They need to go to the dentist. We have every single one of those services under one roof at People Helping People. And that's why we're very successful when we use these funds, and there are measures, and we report back to the state or to the county. They want to know how long the person's been in permanent housing. We follow up, and we follow up. We help people get jobs. We provide transportation on SYV transit through vouchers. And we're able to work with these families over a long period of time. We've been very successful keeping people in residences. So it's extra funding that we get. Not the best way, as my partner back there, CJ, said, not the best way of providing funds. Block grants would be better. Here's a block grant for Solvang. Here's a block grant for Buellton. Well, we can decide locally what to do.
That's why I was so heated about that. I was saying, why would we want to get involved in a program that would restrict our ability to fund?
The strings that are, we have almost 60 different funding sources. Almost every, and that's counting individuals and businesses as one each. All of those funding sources have strings. All of them have restrictions. All of them have reporting requirements. It's kind of part of our profession to learn how we your funds, how we safeguard those funds, how we measure our outcomes. So we're kind of used to doing this. We don't think this is a bigger burden. It's very similar to a program the feds had back in maybe 2014 called ESG. homelessness prevention and rapid rehousing, because they learned, that administration figured it out. It's not hard, it's just logic. Much cheaper to keep somebody in their home and put them right back in their home than it is for them to become chronically homeless. So to us, we've done this program before. We know that we can handle it, and it's a source of funds we really need. We'll be at Buellton tomorrow to ask them to do the same. Mrs. Jameson.
I would just like to make a comment about people helping people. They have a fantastic system of tracing, following their people along. They have a case manager, am I right?
Yes.
And you would be surprised how other places operate. The city of Santa Barbara does not operate that way. They don't. Remember when Gil?
Couldn't say they have an awfully large problem.
Remember when Gil Garcia was with us?
Yeah, sure.
And he was so impressed with how people helping people manages the needs of the people within this community. He said, I've been trying to get Santa Barbara, the city of Santa Barbara, to do this. And they are A+++, and how they help the people in this community. And maybe that's why we don't have lots of homeless, but there are homeless people. You see them sleeping in their cars. You see them with their cars packed to the rafters.
At a meeting in Buellton, Ed was there, right, Lieutenant? Where Mark Brzezinski said, I got to tell you a story, and he started to tell us a story about a guy who was complaining to him because there was a homeless person on his street sleeping in the car. Mark said to him, well, how do you know they're homeless? I went up and tapped on their window, remember? Mark said, not maybe a good idea to waken somebody who might have a gun for for protection. So they're here, but they kind of blend in. And we're seeing about, I'd say 8 or 10 a year, but mostly senior women who are living in their cars because their Social Security maybe is $1,000 a month. How do you rent something, even a room someplace, and then provide for food, medicine? Not everyone has Part C, so they have medical bills. It's very, very difficult. So,
are you involved in that parking lot program in any way?
Yes. So at this meeting with the lieutenant and the city manager and the mayor, they said, well, we should do something about this. Aha. We know someone who is doing something about it. It's one of the really good programs in Santa Barbara called New Beginnings, Safe Parking. So one of the places we're actually thinking about using, it's not a simple task because there's bathroom facilities and security, is our thrift store parking lot in Buellton. People already do park there.
Yeah.
So we're thinking about that, and we're thinking about maybe finding some place here. The mission has volunteered at times to provide safe parking, but it requires supervision and security. And so we're just beginning the research into doing that.
And then do you work with AmeriCorps and United Way also?
So we just did a survey of the riverbed, as a matter of fact, because we were do we have time for this? Okay. Because we were concerned about what happens when they get evicted in Lompoc. Are they going to walk down the riverbed? They have to live, they're going to live someplace, right? They're not all going to go to shelter. So I convinced United Way, who's running Home for Good, to give us an AmeriCorps. The lieutenant gave us a deputy, Arcelia Sencio, and of course I sent her because I was scared. I sent Arcelia out, and they walked around the riverbed, found one encampment not inhabited, and found one little encampment behind Albertsons. We've had maybe not the same person, but someone living in the dumpster and behind the dumpster right across the street from Thriftology there. I would say that's those two encampments is probably about a quarter of the problem. During the summer, I know Ed can talk more about it. There's probably 6 or 8 individuals, or would you call them family units? Family units that live in the riverbed. But we have a very small, and then there's a few people, you've seen them for 25 years riding their bikes back and forth, right? We've tried to work with over the years who don't seem interested in services. So 10 or 12 chronically homeless, but it's the ones that are recently homeless we're most concerned about, trying to get them back into permanent housing. We've been successful. You approved a project in Solvang, and not without some controversy, across from the senior center, and we've been able to get people by paying first and last month's rent into what's pretty affordable housing. We've gotten people into Golden Inn. So we find places, but sometimes we have to say, we can't help you right now. You're going to have to live in the car for 2 or 3 months until we can locate a space. So we find ways.
Thank you, Dean, very much for that explanation.
Thank you, Mr. Thanks for asking me back.
And Hank, I've given those other two plenty of time. Would you like to speak again?
So what he was saying, Sir, I'm all for people helping. They do a lot in the community here, no doubt. But with regard to the people who do not want housing, they choose to live in the riverbed. They choose to live in their car. They have mental issues. The police can't, or the sheriff's office can't deal with them. What we need in the valley is, and maybe they can help us, or the county can help us, is transportation to get them to the services they need down in Santa Barbara at the county facility there. There's tons of beds and housing and food being doled out down in the South County. They have the facilities there. They have the funding there. City of Santa Barbara writes a check every year for $1 million to Homeless Inc. And this year it was even more than $1 million. They have all the facilities. We're small fries. We don't have the infrastructure to support the chronic homeless and the mentally unstable. The sheriffs can't deal with them. They don't know what to do with them either, because people have rights. You go up to someone's car who's parked in front of your house sleeping, what are you going to do? They do it all the time in Santa Barbara. In my old neighborhood, that's why I left, because we had RVs parked on our street and there's nothing you can do. So again, it's a big issue. It's a giant issue. I'm all for helping those poor single ladies, or the kids in school now with their moms, and getting them housing. Absolutely. Those are the people that need it. I'm more concerned about the people that are living in the riverbeds, that are drug abusers, alcohol abusers. They're opportunists who come from all over the United States to come here because of the weather and the opportunities and the lax. They know that it's a lax situation in certain areas. And in that Lompoc riverbed, they could get away with it because no one was, able to do anything about it. So it came to a boiling point in Lompoc, and now they're all vacating, and a lot of those people are the chronic homeless. They're not the single parents or the person that can't pay rent because they have a car bill or whatever. So my issues with the chronic homeless, the ones that choose to live the way they do, coming here and getting funding other than what they should be doing is getting the help they need, the drug addiction counseling, the alcohol counseling, that's all available. And I'm sure she can speak to that, the lady who was here down in the South County. We're small fries. We don't want to take that on. That's all I'm saying. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Hank. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak? I have no other speaker slips. Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the council for discussion and decision. Who would like to start?
I'll start by saying, Hank, thank you for stepping up and giving your comments, and your comments are valued, and we all appreciate that. And I also want to thank Dean for being the face to the organization and making it more real, and knowing who we're dealing with, and having the faith that it'll be handled correctly and whatnot. So I just want to say I appreciate both of your comments, and it's valued. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Yes. I'd like to say thank you too. I really appreciate both of your comments, because I was completely taken aback at first, because I really felt that it was going to restrict our charities' abilities to donate their funds. I absolutely understand the dilemma that and the points that Hank was making. I wonder if there's a way to tell how much of this funding we might be entitled to, because as it is now, when we do our grant funding, we are giving out funds from the people to these organizations. So how it might affect the amount of money that we would be donating in the future to such organizations. So is there any idea of how much we might be receiving if we do?
No, it's going to go through a process with the Continuum of Care board, as Kimberly mentioned, and I think what they don't want groups to do is essentially say, hey, we're not going to fund people helping people with this grant program anymore because they're getting this money. I mean, we don't want to get in that mode where you're thinking, or we don't need to give them as much, right?
I can see how people could go right there with that.
Yeah, and that funding will not, as we said, it's not going through the city. So people helping people is going to apply directly to the county through the Continuum of Care process for their application and funding. So it's not it's part of our budget process at all. So.
Any other comment?
I don't know if this in funding in the last Emergency Solutions Grant round, and we were unable to fund them because we didn't have the resources. So if that gives you an idea, and that was to serve 4 families with rapid rehousing.
Thank you, Kimberly. Anybody else? I want to thank the council for indulging me to allow these people to expend their talking time, because it was in my mind, it was very valuable to me to understand exactly what the process was. And in understanding what we're saying here in this resolution is that we agree that there are homeless in the city, and that because we agree to that those homeless that are in the city that need some funding, that can get it through other services. Is that correct? So with that, I want to move that we accept the staff recommendation for this item. And can I have a second, please?
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded. Can all in favor say aye?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Abstained? Passed 5-0. Thank you all very much. With that, we go back to item 5, which is we're at the point in item 5 where we're up to the council discussion and decision. Do we need any refresher? Who wants to start the discussion? The discussion of how big a system do we want, and how are we going to pay for it? Do we think that recycled water is going to be beneficial to us in the long run or not? So there's a myriad of questions that's got to be answered in my mind before we can make a real sensible decision. So, comments, please.
I have a few questions. I don't know, maybe Matt, maybe you could answer some of these, but one would be with regard to directing staff to move forward with environmental engineering work. Can all that be started while we still review? Like if we limit down to a couple different options, can that process begin while we?
Yeah, we can begin some of the preliminary engineering work and the environmental review, because it's going to take several months. So the city council could take there's multiple points where you could take an off ramp, so to speak, and change course. And the environmental review, the actual treatment process is not going to make that much difference in the environmental review, because we already have a functioning wastewater treatment plant, and I guess you could say that if you produce recycled water, that will be a mitigating aspect to any other potential impacts of it. But because we have a functioning wastewater treatment plant, and we're basically upgrading and possibly doing a minor expansion, and because the expansion would be considered as a mitigation itself, not an impact, it would be a mitigation, because we would be expanding to get numerous homes off septic systems. So, so I don't anticipate. I think we can, because the staff's going to have to prepare a request for proposal and hire a consultant and hire an environmental firm, and so I'd like, I'm hoping that we can get started with that, and then if there's specific questions that you have, we can write those down and come back with, like, for example, more detailed cost information and more detailed information on the impact to our water rates or sewer rates. So I think we can get started, and then over the next few months come back with any other to address any other questions you have, or try to provide any additional information, and then change course without any significant cost over the next, like, say, 6 months.
Okay. I asked that just because I kind of feel like we have two options really to pursue looking at here. But the other question I had was, there's no option in this study regarding even like a potential package plant or things like that. Is that at all viable for this kind of situation, or is that ruled out real early on?
Well, I think the membrane option is the closest as you can get to a package
To a
plant,
okay.
and typically Package plants are much smaller, where you have, yeah, like at the casino. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, maybe Andy.
Yeah, sure, I agree with everything you just said right there. Yeah, the membranes are close to a package. We would specify a couple different vendors, and they would give us their proposals, and then you would select a vendor, and then just like Chumash, if you guys had been there, they come in with sort of containerized cassettes that you drop into place, and they would just expand onto the tanks that you already have.
Okay.
But any other process, you're way too big. A package plant's only up to about 0.2 million gallons per day, and you're at over 1.
Got it. And which, the MBR or the clarifier plant, is there one that installs quicker than the other?
That's a good question. I think the MBR probably would install faster
quickest.
because the clarifier option, as you remember, it does take quite a bit of land. Great big, huge, brand new tanks. You have to excavate. You'd have to, backfill, test the tank.
So the MBR is also much smaller
You're a
footprint.
smaller footprint, right. You actually put triple the amount of bacteria or biological treatment into the same footprint.
Okay. CJ, do you have a question? What, come.
Just as a thought, if I were sitting up there with you, there is a method of analysis called a critical path. The critical path takes you through the expense, the timing, etc. You spread your critical path for this project coincident with the critical path of your other already previously approved projects. I think it would help you examine your yearly commitment total as you and your timing to these critical decisions to help you evaluate this whole. I'm trying to get my head around what you're trying to evaluate. It will need to relate to the other commitments you've made to your water situation, to circulate, to anything else you've got on the table. I understand, I read in the paper, you've got a capital outlay budget going forward. So when you spread this out and look at the years coming, it might help you to know where these pieces are decided and where these critical points of decision making are. It would have to go coincident to what you're going, but as I'm sitting in the audience, just trying to get my head around timing this, because in year 3 you may hear from Los Olivos, in year 2 you might hear from San Ynez. So how do you fit these pieces together to come up with a whole capital outlay for the city for all the things you're trying to do? Just a thought.
All right, so my next question would be, of the two different, either the clarifier or the membrane, which one has the highest reliability, and is there any like MTBF rating or something like that between these for us to consider?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good question. I think both of those systems are very reliable. I think the membrane system generally is more reliable because clarification and clarifiers, it still relies on the operators having to settle the bugs. So if the bugs decide they want to float one day, they float one day. Whereas the membrane, you're always going to reject it. So there's always a positive stopping point where the bugs are totally stopped and you're sucking out clean water. Now, a power failure in a membrane, that would be a problem because you need a pump to suck it, whereas with a clarifier, it just gravities through. But you have a backup generator. We're going to upgrade the backup generator. So if you lose power, you have backup power. So generally, that's not a problem. So I would say generally they're both reliable. Maybe the membrane system's a little bit more reliable.
Okay.
And just one other point in that is that you talked about the package and everything else. This is, once again, the footprint of the facility. And these are those 3 existing bathtubs or trains that I mentioned. These bathtubs or trains don't have to be expanded. If you go with the clarifiers, you're just adding 2 circular tanks, or the membranes, you're just adding membranes. So those existing tanks will be big enough for you in either of those 2 options.
And then also between the two, the clarifier or the membrane, we also have the Fjord lift station, and we have the vault on that side. Does either plant change the required size of the vault on the fjord?
No, I mean, we helped Matt with some odor control improvements on that station, but beyond that, the station had plenty of capacity.
I think there was some talk about that vault was going to get increased either way, right?
Well, yeah, let me clarify. So right now, it's adequately sized for the city's wastewater flow and what we're receiving from ID1. And because the flows have actually dropped a little bit over the last few years, there's a little bit of spare capacity in the lift station. But so you've got two things. You've got the design capability or flow capability of an expanded wastewater treatment plant, and then you have what the actual flow is coming in. So we could basically build a new plant if the city council chose, okay, let's just plan on being able to accept additional wastewater from San Ynez and Los Olivos and Ballard. And at such time, agreements are in place, and they expand their sewer system and build their sewer system and tie more houses in, and start sending their flow down here. We can monitor that and plan to expand and upgrade the lift station.
So it doesn't have to be done at the same time?
Correct. It would have to be done eventually, but it can be deferred until it's actually needed.
I'll throw my comment out there. I think the recycled water could be a good, or is a good thing, just based on the GSA being in effect here, and more so in the coming future. And worst case scenario, we can recharge groundwater. I mean, there's use for the recycled water, and I think going higher end and higher quality is going to prove itself worthy.
I'm still going through my questions. Where do you want me to start?
If they're answers we need, we should hear them.
I'm just trying to look to see how many have been answered and
We can answer 'em.
which ones. See, I got all my questions here, and then I got this binder here, so we could be here for a while. But
Can I make a suggestion? If you have myriads of questions, why don't you put them in writing and have them answer your questions? Because I don't think we're in a position right now to make a
oh no, we're not.
decision.
No, yeah.
So let's take some time. I think CJ suggested that we maybe slow down, take a look, study it further. I'm for doing the best that we can do. I'm for the membrane, because I think that's going to, down the road, it's going to save the city of Solvang funds, instead of just doing, well, we're going to do a little bit here and then a little bit there, and eventually we're going to get there anyway. So why not bite it off now and do it? But I still think that we need to examine further his questions, and I'm sure that there are other questions too.
Yeah.
And if we are going to, if we're in need of property to do any of these projects, then we need to talk to the property owner and see if they're willing to participate, because we don't know that.
He has a couple more questions he can ask.
No, I mean, I think that pretty much, I mean, a lot of them are, you know, as kind of what CJ was saying earlier, there's a lot of things to think about down the road. So a lot of my questions are around, you know, finance this, et cetera, how we're going to do this to, you know, keep our rates at an affordable level for the ratepayers. All those things have to be considered. The impact on some people that might have fixed incomes, you know, it's a bigger impact. So just throwing a huge cost down, we have to really spend some time to figure out how we're going to craft everything and make sure that we don't, you know, cause any undue pain on some of our residents here. So, but aside from that, I mean, a lot of my thinking, no matter how much I go through the details of these binders, is really what our job here is, and that is to look out into the future. And so a lot of my questions are around, you know, what kind of requirements are we throwing down us, you know, later on, et cetera. I just hate to blow $10 million and then, you know, 6 years later we're back here in the same boat. Other things to think about is just even analyzing our water rates in general. We have a large amount of money that we put every year into pursuing water independence. We have a source of supply right here, essentially, that eventually could become our way of having independence, or even talks around, maybe possible future annexations or redevelopment of our current industrial zone. All these things could provide opportunity for those types of projects to happen. So there's just a lot to think about and make sure that we're not limiting our future. So with that, I'm kind of, I don't want to eliminate out certain things, but the way I kind of see this is I think we should look at taking next steps with impacts on costs with regard to either running, doing a clarifier type option or the full-blown membrane option, but I wouldn't necessarily want to rule either one of them out at this point in time. I do think it's a really good, strong decision to rule out the SBRs, or even just trying to put in a temporary fix, because I just see that as blowing some kind of unknown amount of money, and then it's going to be hard to determine what the ROI will even be on that, or how many years we'll even have to do that. So that's kind of that's where I'm at right now with this.
What can we do tonight that isn't design specific? I.e. that we don't have to pick the method yet because we haven't got enough information.
So I've been trying to listen carefully, and if I missed anything, just tell me and I'll add it on my list here. So so what I think staff should do is bring this item back to you in a few weeks, maybe a couple months, depending on how long it takes to do some of this stuff. But number one, we'll initiate a conversation with Los Olivos Community Services District to see, we'll send them a formal letter saying, hey, are you guys interested or not? Because we had just members of the community that came and, requested this, but that was before they were formally formed. So we'll initiate that conversation formally and see if they give us any kind of initial sort of feedback. We will talk to Alisal Ranch regarding the potential acquisition of between a half an acre and 2 acres. I think that's the range of, or maybe it's a 1/4 acre and 2 acres is the range. With the alternative 2, we need about approximately 2 acres. And with alternative 3, we need maybe a 1/4 acre.
And the cost to acquire that land, that's not yet in this, or is there just an estimated cost for it? Or
there's an estimated cost in there.
Okay.
There is an estimated cost included in
what is that cost?
I want to say it was $350,000.
Oh, okay. That's close enough.
But that covers everything: the appraisal, the right-of-way agent services, and we'd have to produce a lot line adjustment.
It's not enough to offset the recycled water costs. No. That was what I was looking for.
It's not $5 million.
No.
Well, we don't.
We're anywhere close.
We don't even
Or maybe
know.
it is.
We don't even know because we haven't engaged the owners in this conversation yet.
That's what I just said, or maybe it is.
Yeah. So I mean, I even hate saying a number because it's anyway. And then we will also bring back. We'll look at alternative 2 and alternative 3. And bring back some little more detailed information on the cost implication, and we'll double check our reserve amount, and look more closely at how much we'd have to borrow, or how much we'd have to bond for, and then that'd be the amount that would impact our rates.
Right.
So we'll look at that more closely, and then bring all this back to you. Now, what I was going to also suggest is, I'm hoping this is permissible, Dave, so you can correct me if this isn't, but I'm thinking, over the next week or two, if you think of questions that we haven't addressed or talked about, send me those questions, and then we'll include those in the staff report with as best we can answer or respond to those. Is that?
As long as it's one-way communication, there's not deliberation going back and forth. If the council's compiling the questions, sending them to staff so that we can answer them, and then council has all the same information at the same time, that'll be fine under the Brown Act.
Okay, so that way you can, if you think of anything else, send it to us. We'll talk to Los Olivos. We'll begin conversations with LSL Ranch, and we'll look at a more detailed cost breakdown so we can tell you a little more specifically the funding and what the rate impact would be.
I think you need to talk to the Community Services District too, because you don't know if they are interested in annexing more properties.
Oh, you mean as far as
What they're willing to pay. You have
okay,
you have
yeah.
28% down for them to pay, and they're only in for 20% at this point in time.
Right, so we were assuming that they're still wanting the additional capacity that they asked for 3 years ago, but that maybe has changed, so that's a good point. That's good. So we'll talk to them as well.
You know, CJ mentioned critical path analysis. Is that a potential that you could perform?
Well, yeah, we basically do it on an informal basis with all the projects that we manage. You know, we did 41 projects last. We're working on 41 projects last year, fiscal year.
Right.
This year we have, I think, 34 or something. Yeah. So every one of those projects, you know, I mean, has a sequence of things that has to happen in order for the project to be implemented smoothly. So, you know, first you're doing budgeting and preliminary analysis like this. Right. You know, then you got to do the environmental review concurrent with the engineering, because the environmental review has to use some of that engineering work in the project description and all that, and to assess the impacts. And then while that's all going on, you can simultaneously be doing appraisals and having you know, negotiations with the property owner for acquisitions, and of course you have to budget for all that. You know, so you have to have thought through that, which we have. It's in our 10-year capital plan. But anyway, so there's a sequence.
Is there anything else you need from us tonight?
No, I think that's great. I think we've got good direction from you, and so maybe if you can get all your questions to us by prior to next city council meeting, prior to the 24th, and that way then we can move forward.
Anybody else have any questions? Comments?
My last question is just reading through this report, it's almost like I feel like we're ready for a systemic breakdown over there. So I just want to know, like, what's our risk level and how much time do we have before we have a real situation?
Well, we've made operational adjustments. I've been consulting with the operators.
Yeah. Okay.
We've improved the system.
Okay. Yeah. So it's.
So we're not about to recolor the river.
No. As long as but we are
not anymore.
Honestly, we sort of are a little bit on pins and needles. You know,
right.
But we're just like.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Be a lot more costly than probably a new plant, right?
Okay, so that's great. If you could be kind enough to make a motion to accept the report, and then I'll take care of all the rest of the stuff.
So I'll move that we accept the staff report and await to hear back from the direction just received from the council.
I'll second that.
Okay, can I have a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Toussaint?
Yes.
Wait.
Yes.
Jameson?
Yes.
Zimmerman?
Yes.
Mayor Richardson?
Yes, that passes with 5-0. Now, on this agenda, council member reports. Are there any council member reports? Okay, with that, then, advanced council action. Okay, with that, we can adjourn.
Perfect.